Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear evidence from another former employee of Rydon who was engaged on the Grenfell Tower refurbishment. I think that's right, isn't it, Mrs. Grange?
Yes, Mr. Hughes.
Right. So could you see if Mr. Hughes is there, please?
I do solemnly, sincerely and truthfully declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hughes. Sit down and make yourself comfortable. All right?
Yes,
Good.
thank you.
Yes, Miss Grange.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Hughes. Thank you very much for coming to give evidence today. It's very much appreciated. Can you give the inquiry your full name?
David Allen Hughes.
So I'm going to be asking you the questions today. If you have any difficulty understanding anything I'm asking you, please either ask me to repeat the question or put it in a different way. Also, if you feel that you need a break at any point, please just let us know. And also, can you try and keep your voice up, because the transcriber lady is there to your right, and she's taking down all your transcript. You've made two witness statements to the inquiry. They're in a folder on the desk in front of you, and I'm going to bring them up on the screen. This is RYD 3094213. So this is your first witness statement. It's dated, if we go to page 27, we can see there 26th of September 2018. And is that your signature there?
That is, yes.
And are the contents true to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. And then you've made a second statement. If we can pull that up now, that's at RYD 3094349. And we see it's a short second statement dated the 5th of September 2019. And you submitted this in order to correct an error in your first statement. Again, is that your signature there?
That is, yes.
Great. And are the contents true to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, they are.
And if we just pick up that error now, so going back to your first statement, that's RYD 3094213 at page 14. And the error you're correcting, I think, is at 61.7 of that paragraph. The date there, the 5th of May 2018, you say should read the 5th of May 2016. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Great. Thank you for that. Now, I want to just start with some questions about your background and experience. So at paragraph 2 of your main statement, you say that you started work for the Rydon Group over 20 years ago as a site engineer's assistant. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And you also say you started working full-time at Rydon in November 2001 after getting a degree in civil engineering from Plymouth University. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great. And did that degree include any aspects of fire safety? Was that any part
to my
of it?
recollection, no.
No, okay. And then at paragraph 5 of your main statement, if we can pull that up, you list out there a number of relevant training courses and relevant certifications that you hold relating to your site-based role. If we can just look over the page at those, we've got a list of those. So, for example, site management, safety training scheme, temporary works coordinator, construction plant competence scheme. We see those set out there.
Yes. Yep.
Now, just thinking back, would any of those courses have covered the functional requirements of the building regulations?
No.
No, okay. Now, if we can go to paragraph 4 of your witness statement, just back a page, we see there that you say, I ran my first project from pre-commencement stage through to handover as a site manager in 2009. I've worked on a number of occupied refurbishment projects as either the main site manager or managing a section of works reporting to a project manager. I've worked on projects with cladding before, albeit not of the size of Grenfell Tower. I've managed an occupied refurbishment project of an 11-storey tower in Worthing, but this did not have any aluminium cladding. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And just to ask you a few more questions about this, was the Grenfell Tower project the biggest project you'd worked on at that time in terms of a refurbishment project?
No, I worked on one of the early ones I worked on was about a £20 million refurbishment of a huge estate where I did a lot of work on externals of blocks, but they were generally brick-clad blocks, masonry blocks.
Yeah, yeah. And you talked there about some projects with cladding, which you worked on before.
Yep.
Approximately how many projects had you worked on involving overcladding?
One really where I came in contact with aluminium cladding would be one in Clapham, but I didn't do the outside of the building, so I was aware of it. I was doing the internals, so I worked on the internals of a number of flats there.
Was that the Chalcott's estate?
No, I never worked on Chalcott's.
No, okay. So, sorry, carry on. So there was that
And
one.
there was also another one where I did a small bit of aluminium cladding on a ground floor nursery, but I'd not done anything sort of high-rise cladding.
Yeah, so does it follow that you hadn't done any cladding for buildings over 18 metres?
That's true.
Yeah. And you said you'd done a low-rise aluminium cladding. Can you remember what the cladding comprised of?
It was aluminium, and behind it was a cool firm K15 insulation, but
Okay.
it was for a ground floor nursery.
Yeah. And was it a solid aluminium panel, or do you know whether
I believe it was solid, yes.
Yeah, okay. Do you recall whether on any of the projects you worked on previously, whether fire safety advice was sought in relation to the project?
On the ones I managed, no, I don't remember. I couldn't tell you on the ones where I wasn't project manager. That wouldn't have been my role.
Yeah. On any of the projects that had involved cladding, were you aware that any cavity barriers had been installed for any of those buildings?
I remember cavity barriers being installed on the one where I was on the internals, but I don't remember on the ground floor nursery.
But if you were on internals, that was not something...
Yeah, it wasn't something I was managing at the time. It was something I remember seeing on the building, but I wouldn't personally be managing the subcontractor putting them on.
So was Grenfell the first project you were involved in where you had to be looking at cavity barriers in a serious way?
In respect to the cladding, yes.
Yeah.
But I'm aware of cavity barriers behind masonry, in terms of compartmentation behind brickwork.
Right, yeah. Now, you talked there about the 11-storey tower in Worthing,
Yep.
and you say that it didn't have any aluminium cladding. Just to be clear, did the project involve any overcladding at all?
No overcladding at all. It was repointing of the masonry brickwork.
Right, yeah. Now, just turning to your role on the Grenfell project, you describe your role as a site manager. That's at paragraph 22 of your witness statement. Can we just look at that? That's RYD 30. Yes, thank you. And you say there, my personal involvement in the project was as a site manager. Steve Blake, the refurbishment director, spoke to me on Monday the 19th of October 2015 and asked me to help out at the tower from the next day. I was asked to manage the completion and handover of the cladding and communal M&E systems and generally help out where I thought it was needed. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Can you just help us, just in general terms, what did managing the completion and handover of the cladding actually involve?
Well, the cladding when I went up there was already well under progress, so it would have been finishing off the insulation, finishing off the works, basically to the satisfaction of the people who needed to see it.
Yeah. And then you also say that you were asked to generally help out where I thought it was needed. Again, can you just expand on what that involved?
Well, it essentially ended up being I looked after the ground floor entrance lobby, so I managed the works of completing that, and I ended up essentially sort of taking over Simon O'Connor's role. But that wasn't what was agreed with me at the time. But I saw that one of the sort of things needed was, interaction with the client, so I became the main client go-to.
You say that wasn't what was agreed with you at the time.
No.
When you talk about at the time, do you mean at the time you first started on the project?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So was it up to you to identify where your help was needed, or was that something that you were told?
It was partly up to me. Steve said to me, go up there and help out where needed, so it was, yeah.
And did anyone at Rydon tell you that there were specific issues that required your help? And if so, what were those?
I don't remember specifically, no, but as I said, I originally got sent up there. Steve told me I'd be looking after the cladding and I'd be helping manage the M&E systems as well.
Right, yeah. Did you ever get a written job description?
Not for going up there, no, but I know what my job entails.
Yeah. On other projects you've worked for with Rydon, had you ever had a written job description?
No, but it's part of our group procedures. I understand what a site manager is entailed, or what a job entails.
When you say part of your group procedures, does that mean that somewhere there's a written document explaining exactly what a site manager
what a
does
site
and
manager
doesn't
does,
do? Yeah, okay.
So that is my job description as far as I'm concerned.
And you'd read that before you started on the Grenfell project?
I've read it, yes.
Now, if we can turn to some minutes, this is RYD 3060234. These are minutes for the progress meeting number 17 that took place on the 17th of November 2015, which you attended.
Yes.
Yeah, we can see your name 5 lines down there. And on page 3, at the top of the page, item 2.9, we see there it says item 3.4, Rydon Management Team, action, and then it says SB, is that Steve Blake?
That is, yes.
To publish revised Rydon on-site management structure. SB noted that David Hughes' role has expanded to pick up anything not covered off by the other site managers. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
So at this point on the project, so this is November 2015, what was envisaged in terms of the expansion of your role?
Essentially, you would say that I took over the number 1 site manager role.
Right, yeah.
So
you
I
were-
was the head of the team.
Yeah. And were you more experienced than the other site managers?
I believe I was, yes.
And more senior to them within Rydon?
Not in terms of job title, no.
Right.
They were all site managers, I was site manager as well.
Right, I see.
But
So
I have managed other site managers on jobs previously.
yeah,
So the one at Worthing, I had a site manager and a site assistant reporting to me.
yeah. Now, what did you understand when you joined the project about Rydon's contractual obligations on the Grenfell project? Were you given any information about that?
No, but one of the first things I did when I went up there was to read the specification and to try and read as much of the paperwork as I could do.
Okay. So when you say read the specification, was that the NBS specification?
Yes.
Yeah. Which
Normally
one?
on most jobs I've worked on, they're called ERs, or employees' requirements.
Yeah.
On this job, they were called the NBS spec.
Yes. Yeah. And did you read any other parts of the contract? Can
In
you-
terms of the actual contract documents, I don't remember reading them specifically, but I wouldn't be interested in that. I was interested in what the specification was.
Yeah. But just to be clear, you didn't have a briefing from anyone senior to you about what the scope of the contract was?
Well, the scope of the contract was to deliver the specification.
Right, I see. Yeah. Now, we've been provided with the contract documents by Rydon, and I just want to ask you just some key questions about, in general, what you knew. Were you aware of Rydon's responsibility for design on the project, as
Yes,
well
I
as
was.
for the construction? You were. And were you aware that it was Rydon's obligation to complete the works in a proper and workmanlike manner and in accordance with good building practice?
Yes, it's on all contracts.
Yeah. And were you also aware that Rydon was to complete the works in compliance with the contract documents and other statutory requirements, including the building regulations?
Yes.
And would you have taken that to have included complying with British and European standards where appropriate, or appropriate codes of practice?
If it's specified in the specification, then yes.
Now, there's just one clause I want to take you to, and it will become evident later why we want to look at this now. If we can pull up the contract, this is RYD 30094235 at page 64. So this is the JCT design and build contract. And if we could just blow up the top of that. And I want to look at clause 2.2.2. So that's the second paragraph, the one below the one that's struck out. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And if we just read that, it says the contractor shall not make any substitution for any materials, goods or workmanship specified or described in the employer's requirements, or if not specified or described in the employer's requirements as set out in the contractor's proposals or in the specifications revised and returned to the contractor by the employer in accordance with the contractor's design submission procedure set out as Schedule 1, without the prior consent not to be unreasonably withheld or delayed in writing of the employer. That's a slightly long clause, but the key point there is, were you aware that the contractor was not to be making any substitution of materials from that showed in the specification in the employer's requirements without the prior consent in writing of the employer?
I've not read the JCT contract, but I am aware of the principle that, yes, we are contracted to do what was in the specification.
But were you aware that if you were going to change anything in that specification, say any materials that have been specified, were you aware that then there was a need to get the prior consent of the employer?
No.
And were you also aware, in general, that Rydon was fully responsible for the design of the works, including the coordination and integration of the designs and the interface between different design elements?
Yes, because we were the main contractor.
Yeah. And so I think it does follow from your answers, but do you agree that in order to ensure that the work complied with the building regulations, someone at Rydon would have to analyse the specification, which form part of the employer's requirements, together with the drawings provided by the architect?
Yes. Yeah.
Now, were you aware of someone in Rydon analysing the specification during the project and checking compliance with the building regulations?
Not with Rydon's, but I always understood my experience of design and build is that we then subcontract the designed part out to the architect and the other specialist designers.
So take the cladding. Who would you think was, or who did you think at the time was responsible for making sure that...
Harleys were responsible for the cladding, but I also knew that Studio E were the lead designer, so they had a sort of overarching role at the top of the design.
But to your knowledge, nobody else within Rydon was checking that the designs were compliant with the building regulations?
Not like that, no.
And when you were reading the NBS specification, you said that you went to site and you found a copy of it and had a look at it. What was the purpose for which you were reading it?
To understand what we were down to build. My job is to understand the plans and specification and deliver that to the client.
Yeah. Were you also looking at the standards that
I don't necessarily read every word of it. I'm trying to take out what I need to know. So I was aware that every job we're trying to do is to a good standard.
Yeah. But if there was a specific standard that was specified, for example, for the external works, which you were responsible for site managing, would you ever go and have a look at that standard?
Further documentation, no.
No, yeah. Now, so as we've just discussed, Rydon was under a duty to ensure that the works were carried out in compliance with the contract documents, which included the employer's requirements. I just want to look at some of the other project particulars which form part of the contract. Can we go to TMO 100411791 at page 86? So these were the project particulars which form part of the contract between Rydon and the TMO. Do you remember ever looking at these during the time you were the site manager?
As I said, I read it, but I would be looking for things specific to my job, so more than materials and everything else. Particulars is, like I say, they are general stuff, so it wouldn't be something I'd particularly be looking at in detail. Yeah,
I understand. Can I just take you to... I think 3 references within this, just to ask you about whether you were aware of the general points that was being made in these documents. Can we go on and look at page 128? And I want to look, this is under the A32 management of the works. And we see at the top of the page under clause 110, it says supervision. And it says there, general, except responsibility for coordination, supervision and administration of the works, including subcontracts. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And was that your understanding when you worked on the project, that was Rydon's responsibility?
Yes, and it pretty much summed up my sort of job title as well. That's
Yeah,
the site manager, that's what I do.
Yeah, thanks, that's helpful. And moving down the page towards the bottom, we see a heading there, you go, building control. And it says there, the contractor will be responsible providing additional construction stage information to building control. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And was it, in fact, part of your role to be providing that construction stage information to building control in practice?
In practice, no. It's generally, my experience is architects coordinate with building control. So
Right.
they provide the drawings. That's what we sort of are part of their package or their design. That's what they do.
I see. So, I mean, we're going to come on and look at your interactions
Yes,
with
okay.
building control when they visited the site. But just to be clear, you didn't think it was part of your role to be providing construction stage information to them?
No, that's not true. If they ask for stuff, I
Yeah.
will provide it.
Yeah.
But generally, to start with, it's the architect who provide the drawings. But if I'm asked for something, I will try and do my best to provide it for them.
Yeah. Now, if we go on to page 135 within this document, in the bottom of half of the page there, you see a clause 170A, which is headed Manufacturer's Recommendations and Instructions. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And it says, general, comply with manufacturer's printed recommendations and instructions current on the date of the invitation to tender. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And you can see at the end, it says agreement certified products comply with limitations, recommendations and requirements if relevant valid certificates. Do you see that there?
Yes.
As well. Now, in general, was it part of your role to check whether the manufacturer's recommendations and instructions had been complied with on site?
Yes, in some respect, yes, it is.
Yeah, so you might see it as part of your role to check what the manufacturer's recommendations were, say, for the installation of a particular product.
Yes, I would sometimes, if necessary, I will look at manufacturers' recommendations, yes, to make sure that we're installing it correctly.
Yeah, and make sure it was installed as per those recommendations. Yeah. Was that role something you also expected the Clerk of Works to be checking
Yes.
on this project? Yeah. Again, I'm going to ask you a little bit more about their role on the Grenfell project later. So taking the cladding system as an example, did you check the instructions, for example, for the installation of the Celotex insulation?
I don't remember specifically checking it, but I do remember reading the brochure at one point because one of the first questions I asked was about whether or not it needed silver tape. And I remember checking the sort of product literature for that.
Ah, okay, great, yeah. I'm going to come back and ask you about that specific thing in due course. So you did have recourse to look at the Celotex brochure at that point?
I don't think it gives a brochure. I don't remember specifically looking. There was a couple of bits on our system or in our file folder, and I went through them.
Yeah. What about the siderized cavity barriers? Do you remember ever checking the instructions for the installation of those cavity barriers?
No, I don't remember that.
Now, staying with this document, these project particulars, if we go on to page 141 of this document, about halfway down, there we go, we see at paragraph 630 a heading quality control, and it states there procedures establish and maintain to ensure that the works, including the work of subcontractors, comply with specified requirements, and then records, maintain full records, keep copies on site for inspection, and submit copies on request. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then there's various items identified for the contents of records below it, including, for example, the nature and extent of non-conforming work found. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, was it part or any part of your role to ensure that records were kept, including the matters set out in this clause? Quality control records.
It would be part of that, but yeah, we have a quality control sort of inspection regime at Rydon, well, essentially called snagging.
So that the snagging process was the quality control process? And it was just that, was it?
Yes.
Did Rydon have any written policies or procedures in place to ensure that these quality control obligations were complied with?
As I said, it's in part of the procedures is snagging procedures.
Right. And can you help us as to how records were actually kept on site where there'd been quality control inspections?
I say the snags I took were recorded and kept in the snagging folder in the job folder.
And hard copies kept on site?
Don't remember hard copies. I generally scan a snag sheet and then we'll email it out to the subcontractors as required.
Yeah. And just touching on the point about maintaining and ensuring that the works, including the work of subcontractors, comply with specified requirements. Who within Rydon had responsibility for ensuring that the roles and responsibilities of subcontractors were clear and adhered to?
I'd say we all have a role in doing that. That's what we do. We manage subcontractors.
Yeah.
To do the work for us.
Yeah.
They have a responsibility for themselves to do the works accordingly as well.
So you saw that as part of your role as site manager?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, just want to ask you a couple of things about what others in Rydon have said about the role of site manager.
Okay.
Gary Martin has said, if we pull this up, this is RYD 3094216 at page 2. And at paragraph 8, he says there, during my time on the project, Simon O'Connor was senior site manager and Simon Lawrence was contracts manager. Both left during the project and Steve Blake assumed the roles. Steve also brought in David Hughes as site manager to oversee the project. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And again, I think that chimes with an answer you gave earlier, but was that how you saw your role, that you were overseeing the project?
That's what my role became. It wasn't what I was told when I went up there. So, as I said, possibly you could say that one of the biggest holes that needed to be filled was the number 1 role, and I assumed that role.
Did you feel when you got onto site that that number 1 role hadn't been being filled properly?
It became clear within a week or so. I say, part of I've always done when I go onto a new site, I look for drawings, documents, look at the programme and see what job entails, essentially.
Yeah.
And yeah, from sort of chatting to the other site managers, they all had their roles and responsibilities. And it also, I don't know which is where I am, but very soon I became the client go-to. Claire very quickly started coming to me.
Yeah.
And sort of, I guess that became my role.
Yeah. Just a couple of points. Claire, that was Claire Williams.
Claire
was
Williams,
it,
yes,
the
sorry.
TMO?
The client, yes, Claire the client.
And when you say it became clear, I think you've said within a couple of weeks or within a week or so it became clear.
Yep.
Precisely what was it that became clear to you?
Well, just that, there was a space to be filled or an overarching role at the top. So, and I had fulfilled that role before at Rydon.
So did you feel that the site managers that were on site needed more direction and supervision?
No, they were aware of what they were doing, but they had never been told to sort of run the site. And to my side, no, Gary had run a site previously with another manager underneath him. I wasn't sure that Jason had done so. Also, although I'd left Rydon's and I said my own thing, I'd come back to him, I had fulfilled that role previously.
Yeah. So you felt that someone was needed to, quotes, manage the site?
Yes.
Yeah. And Simon Lawrence has said in his witness statement, if we can look at this is RYD 3094220 on page 8. Paragraph 44 starts at the bottom there, and he says, my role included regular visits to site to guide and support the site delivery team, project managers, site managers. And then he says the site delivery team is based on site and ensures the day-to-day works are managed safely and correctly to the design. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So again, would you agree that your role included ensuring that the works were managed correctly to the design?
Yes,
Yeah.
it always does.
Great.
As a site manager.
And you've confirmed it was part of your role to manage the subcontractors?
Yes.
And we know that your remit included the exterior and the cladding. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
And does that mean it was your responsibility to be managing Harley once you
It
got
depends
onto
what you
site?
consider managing. I don't manage Harleys. I supervise them on site and I help manage sort of the interaction they have with the other subcontractors, the residents as well. But I don't manage Harleys.
I see, yeah. Did you consider it any part of your supervision of Harley to ensure that the works that they were carrying out complied with the building regulations?
Specifically, I would say that they should know the regulations, especially subcontractor. They should know them as well. I don't know them as well as they do, so I was making sure that their work was to a good standard and the standard that had been Well, will be accepted by the client.
I see.
Well, the client and building control and the clerk of works.
Yeah. So just coming on then to your knowledge of the building regulations and associated guidance. So we know that the contractual obligations of Rydon included ensuring compliance with the building regulations. And we know that your role included dealing with building control officers on site. That's
Yes.
correct, isn't it?
Well, and so did the other site managers' roles include
Yes.
this.
Yeah.
They will show them the building control officer around their part of the works, or sometimes if they're not around, I'll show them around as well. But
Yeah. So how would you describe your knowledge at the time of the building regulations?
it comes from experience. It's something I've never been taught, so it comes from experience.
Would you have known what the functional requirements were in the building regulations in Schedule 1?
No.
No. Do you know
Well,
what...
the functional requirements is to create a safe building, is my understanding. So
Yeah. So if anyone had asked you broadly what the different functional requirements were that you had to comply with for the building regulations, would you have been able to give them an outline?
no, in terms of outline, no.
At the time you were working on the
No.
project?
Yeah.
So does it follow that within Rydon you've not ever attended any courses or training on the building regulations?
No, not that I remember. They will always come up in certain sort of safety modules, but not in any great detail.
So you weren't familiar, for example, with Part B4, external fire spread
No.
of the building regulations? Were you aware in general that there was a requirement that the walls should adequately resist the spread of fire?
In that terms, no, I was not aware. I would say nobody shouldn't build an unsafe building, but in terms of specifics, no. I wouldn't be able to give you the words.
Yeah. Now, there's practical guidance which is issued to help in the interpretation of the
Yep.
building regulations by way of approved documents.
Yep.
Have you ever heard of the approved
I
documents?
have heard.
And have you ever read any of the approved documents?
The only one I remember reading is, I think it's Part M to do with disabled
Yeah.
thing. That's the only bit, and that was because, as I said, the first project I managed was 8 disabled flats, so I was looking for some information to do with them at the time.
Yeah.
So I read it, but they wouldn't be the first documents I would go to. I would go to an NHBC book, which I think is sort of a more practical, for my job, it's
Yeah.
a more practical document, far more sort of descriptions and sort of measurements. It gets into a bit more detail, which
Yeah.
is what I'm after.
Yeah, yeah. So does it follow from your answers that you hadn't read and you weren't familiar with approved document B on fire safety at the time you worked on the Grenfell
At the
project?
time, no, I was not aware.
Were you aware that there was, just in general terms, that there was special guidance for buildings above 18 metres?
At the time, no.
So you weren't aware, for example, about guidance surrounding the insulation and...
No, at the time I was not aware.
So you weren't aware that there was particular fire performance that insulation over 18 metres was recommended to achieve?
No.
Had you ever heard of the phrase class naught?
Yes.
What did you think that meant?
I'd heard of it in terms of paint finishes in communal areas, and I knew it was, as far as I was concerned, it was fire resistance.
And had you ever heard of class naught in connection with a cladding system or a cladding panel?
No, but going back to reading the specification, I noted in it that the fire resistance, it said class 0, so...
When you say reading the specification,
Yep.
do you mean the NBS
The
specification?
NBS, sorry, yes.
Okay. And do you remember which part you were reading? About class
Specifically,
naught?
I think that was in the cladding section.
Right, okay. Were you familiar at all, or did you have any knowledge about fire stopping and cavity barriers?
From my experience previously on site, as and when it's shown on the drawings.
Had you ever looked at any specific guidance that helped you about, for example, where cavity barriers should be placed in an external wall?
Specifically, no, I don't remember looking at it, but to me, they would always be shown on drawings.
Yeah. So you would rely on the
Yes,
drawings
on the
to show
drawings,
you
yes.
where the barriers needed
where
to
the
be.
cavity barrier should be.
Were you aware that the guidance in ADB required cavity barriers to be provided around window openings?
No, I wasn't.
Had you ever worked on a project before which had involved cavity barriers around windows?
In masonry things where you have a cavity construction with an outside or inside skin of brick, yes, cavity barriers go around windows. And on timber frames, I said before, where they're shown on the drawings, I'll put them.
But if they're not shown on the drawings?
I didn't know, no.
No. Okay, we'll come back to that in a moment. So you weren't aware of the guidance in approved document B or in, for example, diagram 33 about cavity barriers?
Not specifically, no, I was not aware.
Were you aware of guidance suggesting that cavity barriers had to be tightly fitted to a rigid construction and mechanically fixed in position?
I'd expect them always to be properly fixed.
Yeah. So during your time on the project, were you aware of any other industry guidance that provided commentary on external wall constructions, including for buildings above 18 metres? You said earlier that...
As I said, NHBC guidelines, that's sort of more of a document I would go to fulfil my role and look at if there was any sort of details or queries. That would be my first port of call.
Yeah. Do you have any recollection of reading any specific guidance documents, industry guidance documents about the cladding when you worked on the Grenfell project? So, for example, would BR 135 mean anything to you?
No, I never read that.
No. Any BCA, Building Control Alliance guidance? Or what about the CWCT?
No.
No. So nothing about cladding, curtain walling?
No, I didn't read any of those documents.
Had you heard of the phrase limited combustibility
No.
at the time you worked on the project? No. So that wouldn't mean anything to you?
No.
And were you aware that industry guidance made it clear that cavity barriers are required around windows?
No, I wasn't aware.
Okay. So just finishing this topic, you've mentioned, you talk about this in your statement about what you would expect in terms of compliance. Can we look at paragraph 21 of your statement? This is at RYD 30944213 at page 5. And you say there, in terms of compliance with the building regulations, from a site manager's point of view, when a drawing is issued to us through any of the design team, if it is a construction issue drawing, then the work shown on the drawing should be compliant with the building regulations. And then you say the ongoing and completed works were the subject of inspection by RBKC building control surveyors and the 2 clerks of works employed by KCTMO. We've got that there, yeah. So does that mean that you expect that any construction issue drawing will be compliant with all the relevant building regulations?
Yes, that was.
And you talked about the drawings that were approved for construction. In the case of the external wall, was that Harley's drawings which had been stamped approved for construction?
Yes, they were what drawings I was using for the cladding.
Yeah.
Or I was looking at.
So did you ever think it was part of your role or anyone else's role within Rydon to be checking if a drawing was in fact compliant with the building regulations?
No, I would expect the designers to ensure that a drawing is correct and compliant. So, as I said, at Grenfell, it was Harley's and it was the architect.
Yeah.
Because Harley's drawings also came out of the sections or the big sections that the architect had.
Yeah. Now, Simon Lawrence has said in his witness statement, if we can just look at that, this is RYD 3094220 at page 10. I just want to look at paragraph 51. I just want to look at the very last sentence. It starts 5 lines up in that paragraph 51. He says, although I have no expertise or qualifications as a designer, my experience as a construction manager meant that if I saw something that was obviously wrong, then I would challenge that, and I would have expected the rest of the Rydon team, and indeed all of those involved in managing the project, to do the same. So I just wanted to check, was that your understanding in terms of your role, that if you saw something obviously wrong, you were expected to challenge that?
Yes, if my knowledge said that it was wrong and my experience sort of in the past I'd come across and I thought it was wrong, then I would challenge it, yes.
Yeah, okay. Now, just in terms of your introduction to the project, if we could go back and look at paragraph 22 of your witness statement, RYD. Yeah, thank you. And we read this earlier, so you made it clear that you were being told on Monday the 19th of October that you needed to help out at the tower from the next day. And you also say a little bit further on that you were made aware that Simon Lawrence, the Rydon contracts manager, was leaving Rydon. So it looks like you were asked to join the project at very short notice, literally 1 day's notice. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Do you know why that was? Was it that Mr. Lawrence was leaving unexpectedly? Or do you think the suddenness of your appointment was just due to maybe a lack of forethought?
I don't know in that respect. You'd have to ask Steve, but it's not. It has happened to me in the past where I had 1 day's notice.
So that didn't seem surprising to you? I mean...
No, it's happened before.
Yeah.
Like, all of a sudden, sometimes you get a call saying, I need you somewhere else tomorrow. And it's like, okay.
Yeah. Now, at paragraph 26 of your witness statement, if we could look on at that, page 6, you say in that first sentence, by the time I first attended site, the cladding was well progressed, and I would estimate 75 to 80% complete. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Can you just help us as to what you mean by complete?
As in when I got there, a lot of the cladding panels were already in the building, so the majority of the installation was there. There was a lot done.
Yeah. And when you say the cladding panels, you mean the aluminium cladding
Yes.
panels on the exterior?
On the exterior, yes.
That was already done.
Yep.
How did you estimate the percentage you came up with there, 75 to 80%?
I must say, I estimated on the time process, but probably looking back on what other people have said, possibly that was an overestimation. But I would say certainly over 2/3 was done. It was well underway.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was about to ask you. So if we just look at a couple of contemporaneous progress reports, I think what we might see is it was more like somewhere between 60 and 70%.
Yes, so yeah, it was well over 2/3. So
Yeah.
2/3 to 3/4 is...
Let me just show you those. If we go to RYD 3056956, this is the site progress report, and it's dated October 15. And if we look at the very bottom of that page, there's a table. Do you see that there?
Yep.
And it's got external facade works and plan progress 100%, actual progress 60%, and it looks like it's around 10 weeks behind schedule. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Again, was that your understanding when you got to site, that the cladding was progressing slower than had been planned?
I was aware it was behind schedule, yes.
Yeah. And we can see it says in the first bullet point below that table, external cladding progressing slower than needed due to insolvency. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Was that Harley's insolvency?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. And then there's just another report I was going to take you to. This is RYD 3057623 at page 11. This is progress report number 16, which reports on progress from the 12th of September 15 to the 16th of October 15. And if we can go on to page 14, we see a table. And you can see there we've got external works, it says facade grid work, insulation and windows. That's 95% complete, I think. Is that correct? Can you see that?
Yes.
And then facade cladding panels, it seems to be saying 70% out of 100. Do you see that there? And 16 weeks behind. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So I think you've agreed that based on these reports, perhaps the cladding was not quite as advanced as
Yes,
you said in
I
your
do
witness
agree,
statement.
Yeah. I certainly would say it was definitely around 2/3. So it
Yeah.
was, well, as I said, well underway.
Yeah,
And in places it was finished with the finished panels on the building.
yeah, I understand. Now, in terms of previous fires in residential buildings, when you started work on the project, did you have in mind that there had been previous fires in high-rise buildings in the cladding?
When I started on the project, the only one I was aware of was Lacknell House, but I must admit I did not know that as a cladding fire. I was unaware it was a compartmentation failure, that there was failures in the basically the voids above the ceilings.
Yeah,
So that I think had come across in a fire safety training.
yeah,
So I did not know it as a cladding fire.
yeah, that's helpful, yeah. So had you heard of any other domestic fires in the UK in high-rise buildings in the cladding?
No.
Or any international fires,
At the
high-rise
time
fires?
when I started there, no.
No. Were you aware that in January 2012 a fire had occurred at the Taplow House on the Chalcots Estate project?
Yes, I was aware of that because I'd spoken to Steve a couple of times about it. So I was aware there was a bad fire there. And also, he told me that cladding panels had worked fine there. There was no issue with them.
Right. He specifically said that to you,
Yes.
did he? Can you remember when he said that to you? Was that...
I used to catch a train home with Steve sometimes,
Yeah.
and we had conversations afterwards. And, yeah, and he said that they'd warped, but they certainly hadn't caught fire.
Yeah. Were you ever made aware of an incident report prepared following the fire which had emphasised the importance of cavity barriers around the windows?
No, I wasn't.
Now, if we look at paragraph 24 of your witness statement, if we can go back to that on page 6, you say this, you say, in my first week on site, I spoke to Simon Lawrence a number of times, who was the Rydon contracts manager for the project, about the cladding and the M&E systems. Simon also showed me around the project. Simon left Rydon on the Friday of the week that I became involved. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Can you recall what your discussions about the cladding involved?
It was to do with, I say, the progress of it more. I know I went up the mast climber, I don't know which one, but with Simon to have a look. And thought he introduced me to the installers, and I think he also introduced me to Ben Bailey,
Yeah.
supervisor for them. But specifically, no, I don't remember exactly what those conversations were. Obviously, I was new to the job at the time and trying to take an awful lot in.
Yeah. Was there anything particular you remember him emphasising about the cladding, other than the progress that had been made
More
on it?
the fact that nobody had any issues with it.
Right.
That's what I remember, is that everyone was happy, and I say, the standard had been set, so keep to that standard and it would be fine.
And when you say no one had any issues, do you mean...
I mean,
that
building control, I knew building control had been up the mast climbers with them, and I knew that the clerk of works made regular trips up the mast climbers as well to look.
Yeah. And was that your understanding that he was talking about the quality of the installation?
Yeah, I would say the quality.
Yeah. Did you ask him any questions about the cladding at this time?
I would hope I did, but
Yeah.
I don't remember specific questions.
Fair enough.
I'm trying to glean his knowledge at
Yeah.
the time. So, yeah, I wouldn't be able to do that unless I asked questions, but I don't remember specifically what questions they were.
Do you remember him telling you about what products were being used in the construction of the cladding?
Talking about the cladding panels, I was told that they're ACMs, and I knew I could see the insulation was solid insulation.
What did you understand the ACM to mean?
Whatever, I can't remember off the top of my head now, but yeah, but it was a sandwich panel, aluminium on the outside and plastic on the inside.
Right, yeah.
So it was basically, yeah, aluminium composite material.
And what did you know about the insulation at that point?
That it was solid insulation, that it was Celotex.
Yeah.
I know it's solid insulation, Celotex.
And did you have any discussions with him about compliance with the building regulations, anything along those lines?
Specifically, no, I don't remember any specific conversations. But I would have asked him about building control and sort of his visits.
Yeah.
And his name and sort of contact details.
Yeah. Now, paragraph 26, just below that of your witness statement, in the last 5 lines, I just want to pick up what you say there. You say, in order to better understand how the cladding system worked, and so that I could form a view as to where we were relative to the programme, I reviewed the drawings, considered the programme of works, and I spoke to the cladding installers, TAF, Mark Osborne, and BES, Graham Berry, and Ben Bailey, the project manager from Harley Facades. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Now, can you recall what kind of drawings you considered concerning the cladding at this stage?
Well, it would have been the Harley's drawings.
Yeah.
So they would look there, but I also would look at the architectural drawings as well, so the section drawings. I'd look at all the drawings relevant to the work that I was doing.
Yeah. And where did you physically find those? Where were they on?
They generally on drawing clips in the site office, or they also are saved on our system as well.
Right.
Our sort of management system.
And was it your practice to look at them in hard copy or electronically?
Both, I say.
Yeah.
Both.
Yeah. Did you ever look at Harley's subcontract and the specification that they'd been asked to achieve?
No, but I was aware, and I'd say my understanding always on previous sites, that designers sort of go back, what I consider back to back with us on design and build contracts. So we would pass on the design responsibilities and not everything we were contracted to do onto them.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to show you one document that formed part of Harley's subcontract. If we can go to ART 50914. This is part of the specification. It's Curtains Consulting, so it's the structural engineers that put this together. Yes. 1st of March 2013. Do you have any recollection of ever looking at this document?
I believe I did, but I don't remember any specifics from it. It's sort of quite a high technical document.
Yeah, yeah. Just within that, if we can look on page 11 of the document. At paragraph 7.1.13, it says there the system should comply fully with the recommendations of the BRE report. And then there's a BRE report there. Do you remember noticing that the system they were installing had to comply with certain BRE guidance?
No, I don't remember that specific clause.
And then on page 13, 7.2.4, we can see there it says the cladding system shall meet the requirements of rain screen cladding as specified in, and then it's got the standard for walls with ventilated rain screens and various other
So the section H92 was the section in the NBES specification.
Yeah, correct. But did you note that they had to meet the requirements of the standard for walls with ventilated rain screens, the CWCT 1998 standard?
I don't remember seeing that, but I do remember the CWCT bit in the NBS specification. So I don't remember it in this document, but I do remember it in the NBS.
Yeah. So obviously you were there to supervise Harley's work.
Mm-hmm.
What documents did you think you needed to read in order to be able to do that effectively?
To do my job effectively, it is the plans and specifications. That's what I work to.
Yeah. Now, we saw earlier that you also said in paragraph 26 that you spoke with employees of Osborne Berry and Harley. Can you recall what you discussed with Osborne Berry? That's TAF, Mark Osborne, and BES, Graham Berry. Do you recall what you discussed with them?
Specifically, no, but it would have been in general terms, as in sort of the process they're going to. I say a lot of it is sometimes it's what do they need from me to be able to do their work.
Yeah.
Ensuring that, the bits that Rydon to manage, the access, the towers, things like that they're all things. So it was in specific terms. Oh, no, sorry, non-specific terms, yes.
I understand, yeah.
Sorry.
And what about with Ben Bailey of Harley? Do you recall?
Very, very similar conversations. So when I went up there, as I said, I knew my role was to finish it off, so what did they need from me to finish it off? And so then it would be sort of programming, how long do they think it's going to take them to finish? When can I start offering up the facades or to the people who needed to see it, so the building control and the clerk of works?
Yeah. You said in that paragraph of your witness statement that the phrase you used was that you had these conversations in order to better understand how the cladding system worked.
Yes.
What were you particularly interested in terms of how it worked?
The building process. So there's a process you go through. So in that respect, putting the rails on, fitting the insulation, putting the cladding panels on. That's
Yeah.
sort of very simplistic terms, but to
Yeah.
me it was a process that they had to go through
Yeah.
to finish the product.
So the layering process.
Yeah, the layering
of
process,
each product.
if you want to
Yeah.
describe it like that, yes.
Yeah. So can we just look at an email from Ben Bailey to you? This is RYD 3060605. So this is Ben Bailey to you, 8th of December 2015, so a couple of months after you've started on site.
Yep.
And it's headed scratches in the cladding. And he says, Dave, as per our conversation, I can confirm that light surface scratches will not adversely affect the performance or longevity of the cladding panels where the scratch has not penetrated through to the core. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Can you recall the conversation that you had? Because he says, as per our conversation.
That came about after one of our inspections up towers, and I believe it was the first one we did with building control and the clerk of works, so it might have been the first time I took them up there.
Yeah.
They noticed scratches on there, and they were right at the top of the building, but they were asking for us to change the panels, and I said, well, could we repair them? They're not going to be visible sort of 24 stories up, a little scratch like that. And the building control and clerks would rather they were swapped. So this was Ben sort of saying to me, look, we think we could repair them and it's not going to affect their performance in any way, shape or form.
Yeah.
So it was, what I saw, little scratches.
Yeah. During that conversation, did you inquire or were you made aware that the cladding was made of ACM containing a combustible polyethylene core?
I did not know it was combustible.
So you just thought it was plastic, is that right?
General terms, yes. Yeah, it was two sheets of aluminium held together, sort of glued together with a plastic inside. Or was it PE? So.
Had you heard the phrase PE at the time? Was that?
I don't believe I knew it was PE, no.
No.
More just, plastic inside.
So you didn't know the middle was polyethylene?
I don't remember specifically. I might have been told that was a material, but it didn't sort of register in that respect.
When Mr. Bailey mentions the performance here, and he says it won't adversely affect the performance, what did you understand him to mean by performance?
That a scratch on the outside is not going to affect its performance. So,
But performance in terms of what? What were you
well,
thinking
just
of?
more in terms of longevity. That
Yeah.
it wouldn't, I say, get in there. Possibly, I don't know whether aluminium rusts or. So it would still last as long as it was supposed to, which I believe was around 25 years.
Yeah. So do you think there was any part of the discussion that focused on fire performance?
No, certainly wasn't any discussing fire performance at that time.
Yeah. Now, at the time you started work on the project, were you aware of different kinds of cladding panels available in the UK market?
I remember the one I talked about, the nursery. That was just a solid aluminium panel.
Yeah.
But no, specifically in terms of like all the products out there, no, I wasn't aware. But I was aware that it was the same panel being used that was used at Chalcott's and Ferrier. So I was aware that this was the same panel that had been fitted to all the other 6 tower or high rises that Rydon had done.
How did you know that? Who made you aware of that?
I think that came through Steve,
Yeah.
and it might also have been through Harley's, because I know also Harley's did the Chalcott's estate.
Yeah. So prior to this project, had you ever come across metal composite materials with different layers and a different core?
I don't remember using them on any jobs previously.
Yeah.
So
And were you aware that panels were also available with fire retardant cores, which were less combustible?
no, I wasn't aware at all.
Were you aware at any stage that the rain screen cladding being installed at the tower included combustible materials?
Not at all.
Were you aware at the time of working on the project that if a fire occurred in the building, which led to significant flames being ejected from the window, the cladding panels would likely fail because they would melt and fall off the building? Was that something that you were ever made aware of?
I had one conversation with Taff about it, but my understanding of what I got in my head was that the actual fixings, how the lug system where sort of you hook the panel on, that little bit there would fail, and just through heat. In the same way that I was told at Chalcott's, they'd warped. So I think it was more a warping that I expected, or the plastic might lose a little bit of strength.
When you say you had one conversation with Taff about
Yeah.
it, were you then just describing the conversation you
Yes,
had
that's
with
it,
Taff?
sorry, yes.
So that,
Yeah.
it was about the fixings and whether
Yeah,
they would
it's
fail.
my understanding to say, yeah, but the way it was held on, it kind of hooked over the rails. Sorry, I'm doing motions.
Yeah, no, it's
But it
good.
hooked over the rails, but those little bits of metal would possibly fail or warp, and that might make them fall off.
Yeah. Did you ever discuss the fire performance of the cladding panels themselves
No.
with anybody? Kingspan Cool Firm K15. I want to ask you some questions about that now. So, as part of your role as site manager, were you aware of what materials were being stored on site at any particular time?
Yes.
Yeah. And at any one time, were quantities of insulation board stored on site for use behind the rain screen panels?
Yes.
Yeah. And did you have any knowledge at the time? Were you aware of what the lead time was for ordering that insulation?
It wouldn't. I say that was Harley's. They were a supply and fit, or design, supply and fit contractor. So it would be their responsibility to make sure that it was there in a timely manner. So I wasn't really aware of how long it took them to get there, or if I had been told, I don't remember it.
Yeah. Now, we know that Celotex FR 5000 was specified for use on the tower in the NBS specification. Do you remember noticing that when you read the NBS spec? But we know that what was actually installed was Celotex RS 5000. Were you aware of that when you worked?
Yes, because on our system we had the data sheet for the RS 5000, and I think I was told that it was a wrong note in the specification. I think it's something like FR stands for flat roofs or something, so RS stands for rain screen. So I was aware that what we were fitting was what it was designed. Well, it was being used for what it was designed to do.
And when you say you were aware of that, who made you aware of that?
I don't remember that, I'm afraid.
But you do recall
one of the conversations I'd have had, or one of the many conversations I've had, sort of during the time of the project. But I think it was quite early on.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
So you noticed that the insulation was different, and the explanation you were given was that was just a mistake in the NBS.
That's it. So it's specifications or little.
Yeah. Let's just look at paragraph 55 of your witness statement now on this topic. So this is RYD 30094213 at page 10. And you say there, in December 2015 or January 2016, I discussed with Ben Bailey and agreed the use of Kingspan, as Harley's had difficulty obtaining Celotex from their supplier. As far as I was concerned, Kingspan and Celotex are similar products with similar insulation properties. As far as Ben and I were concerned, it was a like-for-like swap of insulating material. I told Steve Blake and the Clerk of Works, John White, of this use of Kingspan insulation material. So you say that, and I just want to ask you some questions about this. So was this Kingspan insulation material Kingspan Cool Firm K15? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because I'm pretty sure Ben gave me a data sheet for it.
Right, okay, yeah. Did you read the data sheet he gave you?
Yes, but what I was specifically looking for was the insulating value. I knew why the Celotex was there. I knew it was to try and achieve 50% better than the building regulations in terms of insulating properties. So I was asking Ben, were Celotex and Kingspan similar insulating properties? I had a very similar U value.
I see, yeah. What exactly did Ben Bailey say to you about this swap?
But it was like for like. I'm pretty certain he gave me a data sheet which said the U value was the same or very, very similar.
And did you ever discuss fire performance of the K15 with Ben Bailey?
No.
Or with anybody else about the K15?
Never discussed fire performance of the insulation, no.
Do you remember what quantity of insulation was said to be involved in this swap at the time?
No, but I thought it would be kind of carrying on to finish it off because I knew, as he said, he was having supply issues, so...
And do you remember who Harley ordered that insulation from?
No, I don't. No. That wouldn't be something I would be aware of or need to know.
Now, was that K15 already on site when you had this discussion? Or
No,
was he saying...
I believe he was asking my permission to use it
Yeah.
going forward.
So that would be to order it and then bring it onto site in the future? Yeah. Were you aware that quantities of Kingspan K15 had previously been ordered before you arrived at site?
Not aware at all, no. And I never saw it on the building before in my sort of time going up the mast climbers.
When Mr. Bailey had that discussion with you, did he give you the impression that this was the first time this swap had occurred?
Certainly, that's why I thought he was asking permission.
Yeah. Can we just look at some of those purchase orders previously, just to make this point good? So this is at, if we look at SIG 6012, this is a Harley purchase order. It's dated the 26th of May 2015. We can see that on the top right-hand side. Do you see that there?
Yep.
And it's to SIG, the company, SIG Insulation Maidstone. And then we can see in the main description, it says Kingspan K15 insulation board, 12,000 times 24,000 times 80 millimetres, 96 sheets there. You can see that. And then underneath it says delivery by vehicle with Moffat, 4th of June 15. And then it says site has restricted entrance. Do you see that there? And
Yes, I do.
we can see it's in the context of Grenfell Tower, because on page 3 of this purchase order, if you just scan...
Well, it says it at the bottom, it says ship to.
Yes, it does. And just to be clear, there's a site plan given at Grenfell Tower just a few pages later. So that's the first purchase order we've seen, which was some time before you arrived on site in May 15. And then if we can look at another one, this is SIG 6013. And if we look at the bottom of page 2, sorry, this is the email chain that leads to this, that's right. So if we look at the bottom of page 2, yeah, this is Jill Walker to Ben Bailey, 3rd of June 15, sorry, 26th of May 15. And she says, hi Ben, she's at SIG, we can see that from the bottom. The delivery we arranged for the 3rd will now go on to the 10th. Celotex have pushed out the lead time on this product, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. And then if we go up to the top of page 2, we see Ben Bailey's response. He says, are you joking? And then he says, is K15 held in stock at the same thickness? Is the delivery for this week still on? Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And then bottom of page 1, and she says, yes, delivery for this week's okay. They have production problems apparently. K15 80 millimetres is not stock but has a 3 to 5 day lead time. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And then at the top of page 1, he says, as discussed, please see the purchase order attached for the K15 order. And then he says this quantity should be taken off the total purchase order on the Celotex order issued on the 25th of March 15. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And that was the purchase order that we looked at. So I take it from your answers before, you had no knowledge of any of this happening?
No knowledge
before you
at
were on
all, and I
site?
do not remember seeing it on the building at all.
Oh, that was my next question. Do you remember ever seeing Kingspan call for K15?
No. But a lot of the boards up on the thing were unbranded as well, so I didn't notice it.
Oh, right. What percentage of the boards would you say were unbranded?
Don't know off the top of my head.
But you remember some of them
Yeah.
being unbranded?
Yeah.
But presumably when you got to site, I think you said earlier, a lot of the cladding panels were on there.
So
you
could be a good chance that it was already behind panels which had been fitted.
Yeah. There's another order of K15 I just want to take you to. This is at CCF 6019. This is on the 10th of September 2015. And we can see this is an order to a different company, CCF, and it appears to be 49 units of Kingspan K15 rain screen board. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Harley facades, and it delivered to Grenfell Tower in the middle.
Yep.
again, so you didn't have any knowledge of this order?
No, as I
when you
said,
started?
prior to that conversation I had with Ben, I thought everything on that building was Celotex.
Now, I think you've made clear that the basis on which you considered them to be like-for-like products, similar products, was because of their U-value properties.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. And also from experiences, I've done lots of sort of this board in masonry cavities, and it's always either Kingspan or Celotex. Just as far as I'm concerned, they were I know them as solid insulation boards,
Yeah.
and they are very, very similar. As I said, and they proved almost by the same thickness was the same U value, so it does the same job.
And did you look at any K15 literature at this time?
I remember Ben giving me the data sheet to basically prove that the U value was the same. That's what I was after.
And do you recall looking at the fire performance on
No,
that
I
data
don't.
sheet? That wasn't something you looked at?
No.
Did you know that Kingspan is a phenolic foam, whereas the RS5000 is
No,
a...
as I said, I knew them
poly-ice.
as solid insulation.
Yeah. Did you ever consider the fire safety performance of K15?
Specifically, no. But as I said, every job I've ever done has had that product, be it Celotex or Kingspan, in some quantity, be it in the walls, be it in roofs, be it under screeds.
Did you consult any of those who'd specified the Celotex in the first place? For example, did you consult Studio E over the swap?
No, I did not.
Exova, did you talk to
No.
Exova? Did you talk directly, or anybody you know of talk directly to Kingspan themselves about it?
Not that I know of, unless Ben spoke to them.
And did you ever request a copy of the BBA certificate for the Kingspan
I don't
material?
know.
So you don't remember ever seeing a BBA certificate? I think it follows from your answers, but I want to ask you nevertheless. Did you ever ask yourself whether the K15 product was of limited combustibility at any point in the project?
I've never ever heard insulation described in terms of combustible or non-combustible. It's always just been solid or quilt insulation. That's how I know them.
Yeah. Do you remember looking at an LABC certificate
No, I
for
don't.
Kingspan? No. Now, going back to paragraph 55 of your statement on page 10, you say in the last sentence that you told Steve Blake and John White of the use of this Kingspan insulation material. Can you remember when you told them that?
I believe it was soon afterwards, after I'd had the conversation with Ben,
Yeah.
just to let them know that, yeah, there would be a different material on there. And I explained to Steve the reasons why, to do with supply issues.
Yeah.
And I might have said the same to John. I remember having a conversation, I don't remember specifics of it.
And you don't remember them saying to you, well, actually, it's already been used. We know
No.
that.
As I said, I wasn't aware it was on the building before I essentially said yes, or agreed with Ben.
And did they ever ask to see any information about the K15?
Not that I remember, no.
We've already discussed, and I showed you that specific clause, do you remember 2.2.2 of the contract that said that Rydon shouldn't substitute any materials without the prior written consent of the
Yes, I remember.
employer, the TMO. Was the TMO ever consulted about the intention to use the K15?
No, unless John told them. But John was working for the TMO.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And did you ever, I think it follows, but did you ever submit reasons for the proposed substitution?
No, I did nothing on writing on this, no.
And did you provide John White with any documentation about the K15?
I don't remember doing so, no.
Did you ever tell building control at any time that some of the insulation was K15?
I don't remember, no.
So you don't remember whether building control ever were provided with any specification or written material about K15 on the project?
Certainly I never gave them, so I would presume that no, they never did get any.
We'll come back to look at building control later. why did you not think to tell building control that you were going to be using a different insulation product?
Because, like I said, going back to my knowledge at the time, it was very, very similar. It's almost whichever Celotex or Kingspan, whichever one gets specified by the designer, is what goes on the building. I say they are so similar to me from my knowledge and experience, but I didn't see it as an issue.
Mr. Chairman, I've just got one or two
That's
questions
all right.
on this
Keep going.
topic. If I finish this topic and then we could break.
Yes, that's all
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.
So if we can go to paragraph 57 of your witness statement and look at RYD 30942. Yep, sorry, you've got it there. So paragraph 57, you say there, I was involved in the choice of plasterboard to the walls of the entrance atrium. And you say, I discussed this with Mark Dixon of SDP, who suggested Duraline instead of Fireline plasterboard, as Duraline was more resistant to impact, but still had the same fire rating.
Yep.
This change of plasterboard was approved by the architect. Do you see
Yes.
that there?
Yep.
And we can see that from an email. If we go to the email, this is SEA 3013533 on page 1. If we look at the bottom of page 1, there's an email from you to Neil Crawford of the 9th of November. That's it,
Yes.
at 9:40. And he says, hi, Neil, thanks for visiting site on Friday. It was good to meet you. And then if we go over and you confirm with him then, following walk around, I'd like to confirm the following agreements. And if we look at point 4, we can see it says there, Duraline board to communal entrance lobby with a skim finish. Do you see that there? So we can see that in this case, you did seek approval from the architect before changing the materials installed on site. Can you explain why, if you did that for this material, you didn't do it in relation to the K15 swap?
Because
for the
specifically, I
Celotex?
was discussing with Neil at the time, and it was part of the walk around, the conversations we had about the finish to the lobby area. No, I can't explain why I didn't.
Okay. Mr.
Sorry,
Chairman,
I can't explain in relation to the K15. Why.
yeah, thank you.
So it just goes back to experience that they were very similar in my mind. So
Yeah.
it was almost a similar approved.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good
A
moment.
good point?
Yes, please.
Yes. Right. Well, Mr. Hughes, we're going to have a short break now and give everyone a chance to stretch your legs and so on. While you're out of the room, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything related to it. All right?
Yep, okay.
And we'll come back at 25 to 12, please.
Okay.
All right? We'd like to go with the usher. She'll look after you. Right, 25 to 12, please. Okay. Right, could you ask Mr. Hughes to come back in, please? Thank you. All right, Mr. Hughes?
Yes, thank
you.
you.
Ready to carry on?
Yes, I am.
Good. Thank you, Ms. Grange. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of follow-up questions on the K15 before I move to a different
Okay.
topic. I think you said in your evidence that you believe that Mr. Bailey was asking my permission to use it. Do you remember?
Well, permission to change it.
Yeah, yeah. Who actually gave that permission? Did you understand that to be part of your role as site manager, or did you
I don't
ask?
say permission's the right word, more agreement to use it, but...
But you talked about speaking to Mr. Blake about this, to
Yes.
Steve Blake. Were you asking him if he was content for the change and for his permission? Or did you understand that you could give that permission, you were just informing Steve Blake of what had happened?
I guess in that respect, I would say that I was giving permission, yes. He was asking if he could use it, and I said yes.
Yeah.
As long as it complied with the U values,
Yeah.
and it was a similar product.
Yeah, that's helpful. Turning to a different topic now, I want to ask you about the window infill panels.
Okay.
So principally, I want to ask you about the white window infill panels. Do you remember, between
Yes.
the main windows on the tower? Now, just can you confirm that the window frame installations were carried out by Harley and Osborne Berry?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. And this included the aluminium window panel system, including those window infill panels, didn't it?
Yes.
And it also included the section of the windows which housed the extractor fan for the kitchens. Yes. Yeah. Can we just look at a Harley drawing on this topic? This is HAR 403953. This is a drawing dated the 3rd of March. And we can see it's marked approved for construction. And it's had various revisions we can see at the bottom there. And I just want to ask you, what we see, it's not very clear, but I think we can find it, is that those two panels we were just talking about are marked P1 and P2 on this drawing. If we zoom into the middle hatched section, in the top left-hand corner, we see P1 for the main big infill panel, and then P2 for the little panel. Can you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And would you have understood when you were looking at this drawing that that was referring you to the Harley specification, to their own specification notes?
Yeah, all the little notes on there would refer you back to a specification or part of the specification.
Did you yourself ever make any investigations as to which materials made up the P1 and P2 panels?
No, I did not.
So you didn't review Harley's specification notes for these two panels?
No, but I'd just like to state that when I took over, or when I went up to Grenfell, as far as I'm concerned, pretty much all of the windows had been fitted.
Yeah. Can we just look at those specification notes? This is HAR 30017762. And if we look on the left-hand side of that page, we can see 6 items down, we get the glazing P1 panels, and below that we see the glazing P2 panels. Can you see those?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, in the middle of the page. And for P1 panels, we can see that the outer is a 1.5 millimetre aluminium skin, and the core is a 25 millimetre styrofoam. Do you see that there?
I do.
And then for the P2 panel, we can see it's got a 25 millimetre Kingspan TP10 rigid insulation. Do you see that there in the core?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, so looking at this now, is your recollection that you didn't see this at the time of the project?
I would have read this, but I don't remember noting that. And as I said before, I would expect it, by the time it got to me, to be compliant with building regulations.
Yeah. Did you know what styrofoam was at the time?
I'd heard of it. It's sort of like egg cup kind of thing, I guess. But yeah, I had heard of it.
Did you know that it was a trading name for extruded polystyrene
No,
insulation?
I did not.
So does that mean that you didn't know when you were on site that those window infill panels had extruded polystyrene inside?
Specifically like that, no.
So you didn't ever raise any concerns about the use of styrofoam or extruded polystyrene in these locations?
No, because I say by the time it got to me, I was sure it was compliant with building regulations.
Had someone said to you, in those panels, by the way, we've got extruded polystyrene, maybe someone, chatting on site says it to you, what would you have made of that? Would it have concerned
If it complied with this, and they were telling me it complied with what's on that piece of paper, I would have made nothing of it.
Yeah. Now, the P2 panel, we just saw that the specification is for the Kingspan TP10 rigid insulation. Now, if we can look at a purchase order just before you came onto site, if we look at HAR 402477, this is Ben Bailey on the 11th of September 2015 to ACP Panel Systems, and he attaches a purchase order. He said, please see purchase order attached to replace the one placed under Harley Curtain Wall Limited, now in administration. And I just want to look at the purchase order which was attached to that. So that's HAR 50445, dated the 10th of September. And so that's the purchase order. And if we look at, so it says, please supply the panels as per attached schedule. You see that in the middle. And if we look at page 6, we can see a schedule. And at the top, we see panel spec P2, that it's got a core of 25mm Kingspan TP10 rigid insulation. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Do you know, I know you came on site in October, so a month or so after this, whether TP10 rigid insulation was ever delivered to site and present on site?
I don't remember seeing it, no. Specifically noting it, no.
So the inquiry's experts found from their site inspections after the fire that the panels used at the P2 location, where the extract fan is, didn't have a Kingspan TP10 core, but had a styrofoam core and were extruded polystyrene.
Okay.
Were you aware of that
No.
on the project?
As I said, they'd all been fitted by the time I started on the project.
I see. So you can't help us as to how
No.
we go from Kingspan TP10 to the styrofoam in that location?
No, I can't.
And you didn't ever check the fire performance of the P1 or the P2 panels?
No.
No. So I want to move on now to a new topic, a longer topic, which is about site inspections.
Okay.
Would you agree that there's a difference between supervising works and periodically inspecting works?
Yes, I would.
And would you agree that in the case of the cladding elements of the construction, they're quickly concealed as work progresses on site?
Yes.
So would you agree that it was important to have regular supervision of such works to ensure that the works were being conducted properly?
Not always, no, because it's about a process that we can't watch at all times. So you watch them at the start, and then you have to, at a certain point, start to or an element of trust that people are going to do what they are contracted to do.
Yeah.
So if they've started off well and you're happy with that standard, and all you can see you sort of supervising during supervision, you see that they're maintaining that standard, then I don't see that, regular supervision in terms of me seeing every single bit of insulation or fire break behind there is absolutely necessary.
Yeah. And how did it work out on the Grenfell project? What was the distinction, or was there a distinction?
Well, to me, a periodic
time?
inspection would be on a weekly thing, would be like a regular clerk of works. I would call that a periodic inspection because it's on a weekly or 2 weekly basis.
Yeah.
Supervision is on a day-to-day and just managing, or say supervising the works, managing the works, very similar. But to me, and also periodic inspection would probably come under snagging. It's done after a certain period when something is ready. So.
Yeah. Did you yourself have a period of time on site where you would say you were supervising, like when you initially got to site, and then you went to more of a periodic inspection regime?
Sorry, in which respect are you talking about here?
The cladding in particular.
Cladding, I was always supervising Harley's work. They're managing it, they're putting it on the building. I'm kind of supervising. It's very similar, sort of managing, supervising, and to me are very, very similar terms. To me, it'd be the same thing. Someone who says I'm supervising or managing,
Yeah.
very similar terms.
Do you agree that a design and build contractor needs to have in place a rigid site supervision regime to ensure that all construction carried out by itself or its subcontractors is compliant with the relevant designs, drawings, specifications, etc.?
It would certainly help, yes.
Can we look at something that's said in the Rydon company witness statement? So we've had a witness statement on behalf of the Rydon company itself.
Yep.
If we can look at RYD 30094236 at page 23. And if we can look at paragraph 35 under G there, which is under the heading monitoring during the works. So it says, Rydon's role in refurbishment projects is that of main contractor. Typically, this means it is also appointed as principal contractor for the purposes of the CDM regulations. This means that it has significant experience of discharging its duties in respect of the planning, managing and monitoring of the construction phase, liaising with its subcontractors. This expertise and experience is encapsulated in the systems and procedures which Rydon used and continues to use to monitor the work of its subcontractors, which are in turn built on Rydon's ISO 9001 accredited project management system. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Now, were you familiar yourself when you worked on the project with Rydon's ISO 9001 project management system?
I know they got 9001, and yes, so I was familiar with it. Didn't know every bit of detail of it, but I'm certainly familiar with it.
What practical effect did that have for you on site? What were you aware of in terms of procedures that you had to comply
As I
with?
said before, snagging inspections.
Snagging inspections. Yeah.
And well, I say it's also part of these, I say you call it supervision managing, but if I see anything wrong, then I would note it and tell them not to do it
Yeah.
or make them change it.
Were you aware of any written policies or procedures which reflected these 9001 project management systems?
Sorry, I don't understand how you mean.
Were you given any written policies or procedures about project management systems?
A lot of it is on the RMS, so that is almost like our project management system, I think,
Yeah.
as you say. I
Yeah.
do know my way around that. So
And
I
that-
would go for it, and that would give us the processes and the various forms that I would need to use to fulfil my duties.
So you would have specifically looked at policies and procedures on that RMS, would you?
Not all of them, no, not all the words, but I knew how to operate within the RMS or how the RMS system worked. But a lot of time I say looking for a snag sheet. We have a standard snagging inspection sheet.
Yeah.
I know where to find that.
Yeah. I understand about the snagging process and the inspection sheet.
Yep.
We'll look at that.
Okay.
Were you aware of anything else that you had to be doing on site to comply with that project management system?
Sorry, I don't remember in what.
I understand you're
Yeah,
snagging.
I am familiar with our RMS system, yes.
Okay. Can we look at paragraph 86 of your statement now? This is RYD 30094213 at page 19. And I just want to look at the first sentence. You say, I was involved in the snagging, inspection and handover of all of the exterior of the building. Do you see that there?
Yep.
Now, by the time you came on board, Grenfell was between 60 and 70% complete.
Yeah.
We've seen that. Who was responsible for doing the snagging inspection and handover of the exterior of the building prior to you coming onto site?
I'm not sure who was. I think it was Danny Osgood was or looked after it for a while, but I don't know all the people who were.
So you
responsible.
didn't take over from somebody performing
Not
exactly that
specifically,
role?
No.
So did you feel at the time that it was a new role that you were performing to be carrying out the snagging?
No, I saw it more as managing the Harley, so managing, I say, external manager, I would class it as.
Yeah. Now, in the paragraphs that follow, you have explained stage by stage what the snagging, inspection and handover of the exterior would look like. You've
Yep.
explained the process. And what I'm going to do is take you through that step by step and ask
Okay.
you some questions about it over the course of quite a few questions. So we'll keep coming back to look at this part of your statement as we go through the process that you followed. So just focusing then on step 1 to start with at paragraph 86.1. You say there, I initially took John Hoban, John White and Ben Bailey up the mast climbers on the 11th of November 2015 to discuss what they required to see. We went up the west and north elevations. At the time we went up, the works were nearing completion, but there were a number of panels not fitted yet, giving them an opportunity to look at the fitting of the rails, insulation and fire breaks. They had a couple of minor concerns about scratches and scuffs to the cladding panels. We also discussed the process of striking the mast climbers and making good the cladding where the mast climber struts were fixed to the building.
Yes.
Do you see that there? So I just want to ask you a few questions. So this was, if we go back to the previous page, so this is on the 11th of November 2015, where you took them up. Now, was that the first occasion since you'd commenced working on site that you had inspected the cladding yourself?
No, it wasn't the first time I've been up with mast climbers.
And were you aware that there had been a building control inspection in May 2015 prior to this?
Yes, I'd been told that building control had been up with mast climbers prior to my starting on the project.
And were you told anything about what had occurred on that building control
Only that
visit?
there were no issues. He had flagged no concerns.
Right. So how much previous inspection had you done prior to this 11th of November 15 visit?
I'd been up and looked at it a lot, and I say it was me getting to know what was on the building as well. And essentially, as I said, it had already been started, so we say 2/3 of it was already up there.
Yeah.
But what I understood my role was to make sure that a similar standard was done. If the client, if the clerk of works and building control were happy the standard was up there, to hand over the building and to sort of get it passed at the end, I would need to maintain that standard.
Yeah. Can you remember which areas you inspected? Did you go up all 4 facades?
I wouldn't say I was inspecting it. I was going up there, I was talking to the things, I was also just familiarising myself. Sometimes it was specifically you'd go up there with sort of to answer a query from TAF or Bez about, and it was just, I say, it was me understanding the processes and everything else and just knowing what they needed of me as well. And if there had been any issues that I thought, or areas that I thought were issues.
Yeah. Did you inspect, sorry, you said it's not inspection, but did you go and look from the outside and the inside?
No. At the time, I never went into the flats until sort of quite.
So you were just
later in
going
the
up
project.
on the.
Yeah, I was. As I said, my role at the start was to do the cladding. So.
Yeah. Did you identify any defects or issues with the cladding prior to this building control visit?
No, not with the cladding. But I go back to what I told you earlier. One thing I did notice that the gaps or the joins on the insulation boards weren't taped. I asked TAF and Bez this question, and they said that they didn't need to, and that's when I went back and referred to the Celotex, or had a look at the Celotex brochure to see if I could see anywhere specifically it says that the joins had to be taped. And that was, and I'm talking about the joins between the insulation boards.
Yeah.
It was noticeable that join from when the insulation board went to the cavity barrier, that was all taped.
Right.
So I asked why sort of the joins in the insulation.
Sorry, carry on.
And I asked why the joins in the insulation board weren't taped, and they told me they didn't need to be.
And when you went and looked at the Celotex data sheet, what did that tell you about whether joints needed to be taped?
I could see nothing on there anywhere that said it needed to be taped. So, where I taped, I mean a silver foil tape, so it would look similar to, it's like a silver, an adhesive silver foil tape.
Yeah. Did you notice that the edges weren't ever taped?
I did notice that, yes.
Yeah. And was that something you checked as well?
Yes, did check that.
And what did you conclude?
I concluded that there was no need to do it.
Right. Now, had you identified any issues with the cavity barriers prior to that visit on the 11th of November 15?
No.
Did you keep any record of what you'd seen on site up to that point?
No.
Now, you said you say at paragraph 61.2 of your statement, if we just look at that, this is on page 13. You say there, I requested that John Hoban visit site to inspect the cladding on the 11th of November 2015 to discuss what he required to see to sign it off. Do you see that there?
Yes.
This was a visit at your request, is
Yes.
that right? Not at
Yep.
theirs. And was that the pattern that was then followed with building control visits? Were they at your request or at their request?
Mostly at my request.
In your experience, was it usual for you to have to take the initiative arranging the site visits by building
Yes, because I
control?
would be telling him that it was ready to inspect. It was finished and I needed him to go up there and essentially say, yes, I'm happy. Because at the height of it, I need to know that he was happy with it so I could start to strike the mast climbers.
Yeah.
Because the worst thing would be that if all of a sudden said he wasn't happy with it and we had to start putting them back up.
Yeah. Now, just looking at a document, if we can go to RYD 30566059. This is an email that you send to John Hoban on the 30th of October 2015, so not long after your arrival, about 10 days after you started work on site. And you say, hi John, thanks for calling me back today. And then you say, as discussed, it would be great if you could make a site visit on Tuesday afternoon whilst my director Steve Blake is on site. I'd like Steve to be involved in our chat about the outstanding structural information you require of us to satisfy building control so we can achieve final sign-off.
Yep.
Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
So is it right that this email followed a call that you'd had with John Hoban?
Yes, it did.
And during that call, is it right that you talked about outstanding structural information which building control required?
Yes, because I say it was something Steve asked me to do, was to make contact with him as part of my sort of job and to just ask him if there was anything outstanding. Obviously, me and Steve were picking up from where Simon had left off, so it was if there was any information he needed.
And what
But this
exactly?
was essentially the start of the process of handing the building over.
And what exactly did he say? What was the outstanding structural information?
That he hadn't received the structural calculations and he needed them.
Were you surprised at that this is your first contact with the building control officer and you find that he's not yet had all the necessary structural information?
No, at the time I didn't feel surprised by it.
Wasn't this a bit late in the day to be considering something so fundamental as the structural calculations?
You could say, but I don't know if he'd had it and just hadn't reviewed it and didn't know where it was. I was very similar to what I always do, ask him if there's anything they need of me.
Yeah.
And
But this
he
didn't
answered it.
strike you as unusual or,
No.
or concerning?
Fortunately, it didn't, no.
Do you agree that Rydon, in its coordination role, should have sent those calculations to the building control officer by that time?
From my understanding, Studio E, the ones sort of managing the building control process, so it would be something that they would have sent to him.
So you would have expected them to have
Yes.
sent that by
I
that
knew
time?
that Studio E were managing the building control process or the building regulation process.
And did it give you any cause for concern that the project might, thus far, not be being run in an orderly way?
No.
When you sent this email to John Hoban asking him to make the site visit the following week, did you know that Mr. Hoban's previous site visit had been on the 15th of August 2015 and that visit was only the second visit that he'd made since the beginning of the year?
No, I did not know that.
Was there ever any discussion at any stage on site amongst the Rydon team about the lack of attendance by Mr. Hoban on site?
No, like I said earlier, I'd been told that building control had been to site a number of times as and when necessary and was fine with the work so far.
Yeah. Was the frequency of site visits by building control on the project in line with your previous experience on other projects?
No, I would expect building control to appear at least on a monthly basis. I think they're called frequency visits.
Yeah.
But yeah, if normally if you haven't called them in for something to inspect something, then they will turn up on a frequency visit.
Yeah. Did you ever ask RBKC Building Control about that and say, I would normally expect you to be here
No, as I said, I
monthly?
wasn't aware that it had been so infrequent.
Now, if we can look at Rydon's progress report going through to mid-November, this is at RYD 3057876. This is Rydon's progress report 17, and we see at the bottom that it's reporting on progress between the 17th of October 2015 and the 13th of November 2015. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then if we go to page 5 of the document, it shows the progress of the facade works. And what it says there is initially facade grid work, insulation and windows is 97% complete. Do you see that there?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Then the facade cladding panels, 85% complete. And it says west elevation due to be snagged.
Yep.
You can see that for both those. And then it also says the crown detail was 100% complete all round in the box below. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Now, during your inspection with John Hoban and John White on the 11th of November, you've said in your statement that you went up the west and north elevations. We looked at that before. Can you remember which levels on these elevations did you inspect? How high up did you go?
We'd have gone to the top.
Yeah. And would you systematically inspect every level? How would it
When
work?
we did the inspection with them, sorry, I'm getting confused which one I'm talking about here.
This is
Is
the
it
11th of
first visit or
November
the
one.
second one?
The first one.
The first
The
one,
11th
yeah,
of
we went to the
November.
top and worked our way down.
Yeah. And would you have done that for both the west and the north face for all the levels?
Yes.
Yeah.
As far as I remember, we went right to the top of both mast climbers.
Now, you also said in that part of your statement that there were a number of panels not fitted yet at
Yes.
that point. Can you remember where those were? Were they in a particular bit of the building?
No, I can't.
Would you agree that on this occasion, John Hoban and John White would only see a small area of the insulation and cavity barriers on this visit, i.e.
Yes, I
those
agree.
without panels fitted yet?
Yes.
And was there ever an inspection from the inside as well?
As far as I'm aware, not at that point.
Yeah. Can you recall whether John Hoban would have seen any branding on the insulation to show that it was Celotex?
There, as I said, there was quite a few unbranded boards, but I don't remember.
Yeah. Do you ever remember discussing the type of insulation with
No, I don't.
John Hoban? And was any K15 installed at that point in the area you looked at?
I don't remember seeing it.
No.
I'd like to say that I'd have noticed if I did, but
And did Mr. Hoban inspect the cavity barriers at that time?
that's why I took him up there at that point.
Yeah.
Because from my point of view, trying to hand the building over, if I'd have presented it to him completely finished and he said, I'd never seen the cavity barriers, then I'd have to stop that inspection, take some off so he could see them. So the idea was to take him up there so he could see part of the buildings which were still in progress, so he could see the cavity barriers and the insulation behind.
Yeah.
That was part of that first inspection to make sure that, we wouldn't have to take any step backwards.
And can you recall whether he would have seen both vertical and horizontal cavity barriers during that inspection?
Certainly horizontal. I can't confirm vertical.
Yeah. And what about the area around the windows without cladding panels installed? Would he have seen some windows without the ACM panels kind of boxed around the windows?
Trying to remember now, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think possibly where the windows butted up to the columns, that was the columns were one of the last panels to go on. So they concentrated on the flat bits between the windows first, and the columns were one of the last pieces to go on. So I can't confirm, but I would say that possibly.
Yeah. And did Mr. Hoban raise any concerns during his
No,
visit?
as I said, from the emails you've seen, that the main concern was to do with scratches on the panels
Yeah.
and the performance in terms of the longevity of the panels.
Yeah. I appreciate you say that was the main concern. Were there any others you can recall?
No, otherwise I probably would have noted it, and me and Ben I'd have asked Ben for confirmation.
Yeah. So let's just go back to your witness statement where you're explaining what the process was that was followed. If we can go back to page 20 of your main statement. and look at the next part of what you say. You say there then, Harleys would snag their own work prior to offering it to Rydon. Ben Bailey did the snagging and sent the sheets to me. I did one of the pre-handover snags of the finished exterior on the north elevation, as Ben Bailey could not make it to site. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Now, I just want to look at what Ben Bailey has said about Harley's own process of inspection before the cladding panels were fitted. This is, if we go to HAR 30010060 at page 4. This is paragraph 13 of his statement. Now, I'm going to take you to several bits of this, but I think it would be helpful, and in fairness to you, for you just to read this paragraph to yourself just for a moment. It goes over the page, so signal when you've got to the end of the page.
Okay, I've got to the boss.
Yeah.
Okay, I've read it.
So if we just go back to that first part of the paragraph. Yes, thank you. And picking up 4 lines down, you say, I remember that before the panels were installed, I went up the mast climber and conducted a visual check of the windows, the insulation, the cavity barriers and the cladding rails in most areas over each level of existing flats in the building. And then he says, I recall doing this on the north, east and west elevations, not the south, over the main entrance, before building control inspection visits, at the request of Rydon to check the work was ready to be inspected. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
So he's saying that at Rydon's request, Harley would inspect the insulation, cavity barriers and cladding rails before the building control check. Is that your understanding of what happened?
Yes, that's what should happen. Subcontractors should respect their own work, and they should give us confirmation that it is ready for us to inspect it as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, they first and foremost, they have a responsibility to ensure that their own work is up to standards and complies with the plans and specification.
Yeah. And then over the page, once he's explained what that check would involve, he says, I then took building control up to see the work. If we can go on the next page, 5 lines down, I think. Sorry, line 6. We see he says, I then took building control up to see the work. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And he, in the second to last sentence, he also talks about building control taking them up to see what was installed. Was that your understanding? He talks there about building control going up to see what had been installed prior to the cladding panels being installed. Was your understanding that building control would be taken up before the panels were inspected?
I don't know whether he's getting confused with building control and the clerk of works here. From my statement, from what I remember, we only went up twice with building control up the mast climbers, and those are the ones I said in my statement. So I took them up once when there was still some unfinished panels, and I took them up once with the clerk of works at the same time to do what I would consider to be a handover inspection.
Yeah.
But the clerk of works went up more often than building control did.
Yeah. And is it right that Rydon itself wouldn't systematically check the insulation, cavity barriers and cladding rails before the building control check?
As I said to you earlier, I wouldn't necessarily check. I have no records of me checking, but it's making sure on visual checks that I was going up there and the standard had been set and maintaining the same standard. So nothing in all my visit times I went up there did I see anything which dropped below that standard.
Yeah. And how often were you going up there?
Very hard to say. When I first started up there, I went up there quite often, getting to know them, getting to know to trust the installers that the standard was being maintained. A little bit towards the end, I started going up there less and less. I was taking more responsibilities. I also trusted that they were doing things correctly. So towards the end, it more came up. I started to go up there when there were specific issues with how to install the panels safely.
Yeah.
So we had a couple of issues with mast climbers stopping panels being fitted easily and safely, and I started to go up there more often. That was a lot more on the south elevation.
Right, yeah. But just to be clear, did you ever see it as part of your role to be going up and checking prior to building control coming on site and satisfying yourself that the cladding, rails, the cavity barriers and the insulation had been installed correctly?
I'd satisfy myself that the standard was similar to what was already been up there, and as far as I was aware, was the standard that building control, or no, not sort of building control, more of a clerk of works at that time was happy with.
Yeah.
So in terms of formal inspection, no, but every time I went up there, I was looking to make sure that it was the standard that was acceptable.
Yeah, but in terms of formal inspection, was it your understanding that Harley was doing that itself in
Yes.
relation to its own works?
Yeah, they have a responsibility to make sure their own work is to the plans and specification and standard required.
What about after the building control visit? Would you or anyone else at Rydon ever do a formal check after that?
Well, building control is the same with any inspection, is if they raise any snags or any concerns, then you have to go back up afterwards, or once that work's been rectified, you have to go back up there and get that work signed off before you could take the mast climbers down.
But that would only be if building control flagged anything, is that right?
Yeah, building control, and it's a very similar process for the clerk of works as well.
Yeah.
That to me is what I'd call a client inspection, the clerk of works. Client inspection, building control inspection, we pretty much did that at the same time on the first couple of mast climbers.
Yeah. Now, Ben Bailey states, and we saw that in his statement at paragraph 13, that there was no checklist or specification to inspect the areas against when Harley was checking its own work prior to these building control inspections. Do you agree with that?
Not that I saw a checklist, but the snag list he gave to me to sort of say, or his inspection sheet he gave to me had things like EPM, cladding rails, so as far as I'm concerned, he'd given it to me saying that they had done everything accordingly.
But Rydon didn't provide Harley with a checklist or a list of things that needed to be checked before building control would come on?
No.
Given that you were relying, I mean, do you accept you were relying to a significant extent on the Harley checks, the Harley inspections
Also,
before building control came along?
Because they designed the system as well.
Yeah.
So,
Given that you're relying to a significant extent on Harley's own inspections of the works, wouldn't it have been sensible for you to have provided Harley with some criteria for the inspections to carry out?
you could say that, yes, but you could say that the drawings are the criteria. Plans and specifications are the criteria that they have to build to.
Just check against all of the drawings.
Yeah.
So, for example, for the cavity barriers, you didn't think of ever providing a specific list of things that it was important to check about the cavity barriers when these inspections were being carried out?
No, but visually I was looking that they were in the right place, so they were horizontally and they were vertically, but they were clipped, it's very much like what Ben says, where they were clipped and the clips were turned out so they were held securely in place and that they were taped against the insulation.
Yeah.
And in all my checks, all my time I went up there, I never saw anything which said that they weren't.
Were you confident at the time that Harley were comprehensively and systematically checking the windows, the insulation and the cavity barriers before
Yes, I believe they were competent. I say, in my assessment of them, which I get in the first couple of weeks sort of dealing with them, and the work I'd seen, I assessed that they were competent.
Yeah.
And they were doing it right.
Now, we saw in Ben Bailey's witness statement, this is back on the previous part of paragraph 13, if we can go back one page. where he says in the middle of that paragraph that he recalls doing the checks that he did on the north, east and west elevations, but not the south, before building control inspection visits at the request of Rydon. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Were you aware that the south elevation had not been inspected by Harley?
I think I talk about it in my statement where Ben didn't turn up on time. Very much similar to, I'm trying to explain, is I would expect Harley's to give me some sheets saying that they had done their work properly and that they had fitted it in accordance with the plans and specifications. I then go up and check that I'm happy with that. And then I then would say to Building Control and the Clerk of Works, I'm happy, I've gone up there and had a look at it. So please can you come up and have a look at it? So I think what he's talking about in the south is the one that I say that I'd done, essentially you could say his job, I went up and checked it before he did.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to get the things done. I wanted to get Building Control and the Clerk of Works up there so I could start the process of striking the mast climbers. So that's what I think he's talking about, the same thing I talk about where I went up and done one of their inspections for them.
And was that of the whole of the south elevation?
That would
you
be
checked?
basically a finished elevation, so all the panels up there.
I you say finished. What I'm trying to get at is the inspections that occur before the panels go on, so of the cavity barriers, the insulation, etc.
Yep.
Do you remember doing that for the south elevation?
Not, as I said, specifically not a formal inspection, but it was done part of my trips up from there, and certainly in the south elevation, I went up there quite a few times because there was an issue where the mast climbers were stopping us fitting the panels safely. So we had to do some alterations to the mast climbers to be able to fit the panels safely.
Right. So just to be absolutely clear about my question, you don't recall doing a formal inspection of the south elevation in terms of what was underneath the panels?
No.
Now, paragraph 52 of Mr. Bailey's witness statement, I just want to show you that as well. So this is at HAR 3010060, page 15. He says that...
Sorry, Ms. Grange, give me a moment here. How are you doing? Would you like a short break? No. Yeah? Right. I think
Sorry, are we going
everyone's
too
getting
fast?
a bit sort of carried away and moving quite quickly, and I think the shorthand writer's having trouble keeping up, that's all.
Well, let's both try and speak
Okay,
more
I'll try
slowly.
and speak
I'm
slower.
sure I'm just as much at fault as you are, but yeah. So here it said, I was never provided, this is Ben Bailey, never provided with the criteria for either building control inspections or those of the Clerk of Works, nor was I issued with any reports they produced. Do you see that there? Bottom
Yes.
of the page, paragraph 52.
Yep.
And he says, I assumed, however, that both building control and the Clerk of Works would be checking cavity barriers, both their location and quality of installation. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you agree that Harley were never provided with any criteria for either the building control inspections or those of the Clerk of Works?
In terms of criteria, yes, I agree. They weren't specifically said we were looking at that, but Harley's had responsibility, design responsibility, so they knew that building and what should have gone on there better than anyone. They designed the system which went on building, so... but, sorry, I never provided any... I say building control never gave us any inspection sheet. He went up and it was these panels. We went up with building control and the clerk at the same time on the first two mast towers that I explained in my statement. And in that respect, the clerk of works basically took the notes because they were talking to themselves at the same time. So we came up with one list, which you could say was a definitive clerk of works stroke building control inspection. And Ben came up at the same time. There wasn't that many issues on there. And so I don't remember giving them a list, but we then went back up with the clerk and checked the bits which were on the list and they'd all been done. That's why I would never have struck the mast climbers without making sure that building control and the clerk of works were happy that everything had been done.
Yeah. Did you ever raise it as a concern within Rydon that you weren't providing subcontractors with criteria for building control inspections or inspections by clerk of works?
No, because it's not something I've ever done before.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I want to look at this point at an email between two building control officers that you wouldn't have seen at the time, but I want to just ask you about it. This is at RBK 401122. Now, this is an email from John Hoban to John Allen within RBKC Building Control. And what it appears to be is John Hoban reporting back to John Allen about what he's done on the 12th of January 2016. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
So we're moving a little bit forward in time here. And under the heading Grenfell Tower, he says this: checking new external cladding to existing tower block, identifying defects controllable under the building regulations on new panels, brief introduction on fire breaks, fire cavity barriers, including location of where cavity barriers on cladding panels should be provided for this particular project. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
So I think he's reporting back. And I want to ask you about, in particular, about this brief introduction. He talks about brief introduction on fire breaks, fire cavity barriers, including location of where cavity barriers on cladding panels should be provided for this particular project. Do you know who gave Mr. Hoban that introduction about that topic?
No. Is it possible to see my statement around that time? Because I'm getting a bit confused with visits.
Yes, I'll find the reference for you in just a moment. Yeah, I'll take you back to that.
Because I don't remember. I remember the ones before Christmas, but without reading my statement again, truthfully, I need to see what I did after Christmas with John.
Right, okay. Do you yourself have any memory of giving Mr. Hoban an introduction to, for example, the location of where cavity barriers would be?
I don't understand why he calls it an introduction when we'd already been up the tower before Christmas and looked at it.
Yeah. Do you ever remember, even prior to this, talking to Mr. Hoban about where cavity barriers were to be placed in the system?
Specifically, no, I don't remember a conversation of that respect.
So, yes, I think you mentioned this visit at 61.5 of your witness statement. Let's go to that. This is page 14 of your main statement. And you say you arranged for John Hoban to visit site on the 12th of January 2016 at 9 a.m. to go up the mast climbers again. I followed up the meeting with an email confirming a conversation about fire stopping to penetrations through walls and floors. We didn't strike any of the mast climbers until each elevation from the 4th to 23rd floor had been approved by the Clerk of Works, John White. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Now, I'm going to come back to that follow-up about fire stopping and penetrations because I want to take you to some documents on that. But, I mean, you don't mention any discussion there about cavity barriers. So, I mean, I think we can take it from your evidence that you don't think you briefed Mr. Hoban about...
No, but I believe, and I'm not stated there, that Ben Bailey would have come up with me, or it might have been, we'd always have gone up with one of the installers as well. We always had to have one of the installers driving the mast climbers.
Yeah.
So I wasn't qualified and hadn't been trained to drive a mast climber, so every time I went up, it would be with someone from Harley's or from the installers.
Yeah. Were you aware at the time of this visit, and indeed on your first visit on the 11th of November 2015, that the design didn't provide for cavity barriers around the windows?
No.
You weren't aware of that?
Well, I was aware of it. It wasn't on the drawings.
Yeah.
So, but I wasn't aware of a need to put them on a cladding system like that. But I know from the drawings that they weren't shown. So.
Did you notice that when you were looking at the drawings? Did you say to yourself, "Oh, I know we haven't got cavity barriers around the windows"? Did that strike you at all?
No, it did not strike me.
Did you ever discuss that, the lack of cavity barriers around the windows, with anyone else at Rydon
No.
or with anyone else at Harley?
I don't remember any conversations like that.
No. Or with Studio E?
Nope.
And what about with building control? Did you ever have any conversations with building control about there being no cavity barriers around the windows?
No. As I said before, I never had any conversations with anyone about it because, as far as I was concerned, it was in accordance with the drawings. So,
Did you know that there was a difference between the horizontal cavity barriers that had been specified on the project and the vertical cavity barriers that had been specified?
yes.
Can you describe what the difference was for us?
To me, the difference was the horizontal one sat back about 25 millimetres from the back of the cladding panel to allow for vertical ventilation. The vertical cavity barriers should have butted up to the back of the panel because there was no need for horizontal ventilation. It was all about vertical ventilation.
Were you aware that the horizontal had an intermittent strip that would activate to close the cavity, but
Yes.
the vertical was a solid block of material which wouldn't intermess?
Yes.
Did you ever check the vertical cavity barriers on site? Do you remember?
Not specifically, no.
And do you ever remember showing building control the vertical cavity barriers on site?
Well, as I said, I don't remember if they were visible when I took building control up. So, no, I don't specifically remember.
Did you ever see any examples of horizontal cavity barriers fitted in the vertical position?
No.
Can we just look at a photograph on this? This is from Dr. Lane's Phase 1 report. This is at BLAS 608 at page 48. And I want to look, this is figure 8.52. And we can see this is the cavity barrier labelled RH25. And it's installed in the vertical orientation, isn't it?
Yes.
Can you see that? And am I right that the green strip would be where the intermittent strip was?
I believe you're right, yes.
So that's also been installed with the intermittent strip facing into the concrete, into the building?
Yes.
Did you ever notice workmanship like that on site, with them being installed horizontal in the vertical position, or indeed with the intermittent strip facing the wrong way?
No.
If you had seen cavity barriers installed in that way, what would you have done about it?
I would have asked them, or I hope I would have asked them to change it and
Yeah.
make it right.
Can you explain why this might have been found on site?
Can't explain.
No. Could it be, perhaps, because there wasn't a regular and systematic inspection of the cavity barrier installation?
It could be.
Now, just sticking generally with the topic of inspections, but I want to ask about the insulation. Can we go to RBK 3052478? This is a document which records some of the site notes made by RBKC Building Control. And what I want to do is go to page 3 and look in the middle of the page. These are notes from a site visit carried out by John Allen of RBKC Building Control on the 24th of March 2016. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Do you remember a visit where you had Mr. Allen instead of Mr. Hoban?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I think you
asked for
mentioned it.
John to come in. I asked for John Hoban to attend site, and then John Allen turned up.
Yeah. I think it's in your witness statement at paragraph 61.6 for the transcript. Now, on the second line down, He's put this: ensure thermal insulation completely fills voids. Do you see that?
Yes.
And we know that you emailed Ben Bailey of Harley the same day on the 24th of March 2016. If we can look at that, this is RYD 3072239. If we look at the top of that page, so this is
Yes.
you to Ben Bailey, and you say, I've just had a visit from Building Control and he's flagged a couple of issues with Harley's work as follows. And you've got ensure thermal insulation completely fills voids, mainly gaps insulation around columns. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Can you just explain for us what the problem was?
I think around the columns, some of the boards weren't cut as neatly as they could do to fill the void or fill right back to the building. So he'd flagged it up.
Do you know whether Mr. Allen was made aware of the type of insulation that was used in this visit?
It's not part of the conversation, I remember. And this would apply only to the bottom 4 floors at this time, because by this time we'd struck all the mast climbers and we were doing the bottom 4 floors off cherry pickers.
Right.
So I didn't take Mr. Allen up in the cherry picker, so it had been what he would have seen from the ground.
Right. That makes sense. Now, we talked about Harley snagging their own work earlier, and I just want to take you to an example of the snagging sheet from Harley that they were using at this time. Can we go to RYD 3059235? And I think this is an example of a snagging sheet. We can see it says Grenfell Tower external handover, and then towards the bottom we can see it was conducted on the 25th of November 2015, and it says facade handover west. Do you see that above that?
Yes.
And checked by Ben Bailey. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And if we can go to page 4 of the document, we've got a section for the cladding. And we can see the snagging comments for the cladding, insulation and cavity barriers.
Yes.
Now, I think we've established it before, but did you receive these sheets, these snag sheets?
Yes, this is exactly what I requested off Ben. This is proof to me that Harleys are inspecting their work.
And on receipt of these sheets, would you ever go and have a look at the snags he's identified to check that they'd been remedied?
I was aware of the snags because I also told Ben that this was not what I needed. I needed a completed snag sheet and he needed to do everything on it and then give me one which was completed so it would be ready for me to go and do my inspection, and then also then after that, following that, take up building control and the clerk of work.
I thought you said earlier that you didn't necessarily do a formal inspection before building control came.
It wouldn't be necessary, not necessarily formal inspection, but if Harley's told me that their work was complete, I would go up and make sure it was complete.
Yeah, I see.
As I said, they had a duty to finish their work correctly first.
Did you ever find snags that they had overlooked or find issues that they had overlooked when you went back up?
No, but no, but as I said, I also did one of their snags at the end, the one on the south, and that would be an example of things I was looking at. And
did you ever have any cause for concern about the thoroughness of the inspections of Ben Bailey for Harleys?
in terms of, I had concern that he gave me a sheet saying it was ready, and it wasn't, because it still had on there 2 no's, and I'm pretty certain I made this clear to him in an email once that he needs to be giving me completed snag sheets so it's ready for me to go up and have a look.
Yeah.
In very much the same way that that's what building control and a clerk of works expected of us. So I would hope, and the way I wanted it to run, that Harleys would give me a completed snag sheet saying it's all done, we've inspected it, and we've carried out our duties and done everything accordingly. I would go up there, and by that time, I wouldn't expect to see anything apart from a couple of little bits. I do remember pointing out a little bit of sort of black trim or mastic which needed to be taken off before I took building control up. But they were, by that time, very minor snags that literally were done with the installer at the time. Because I said I always went up with an installer in the mast climber.
Yeah.
And they nearly always had tools in there that I would come down and say we'd almost snag it as we came down, just cleaning a little bit here, taking it all, and just finishing off bits there.
Yeah. Can we look, I think you referred to an email that you sent, can we look at what I think may be that, HAR 406955. This is an email you sent to Mr. Bailey on the 24th of November 2015. Now, do you want to just remind yourself, is this the email you were referring to earlier, where you raised a number of snagging issues with Mr. Ben Bailey? And I think we can, some of them appear to include, if we look at the second paragraph, snag sheets have been sent to me with items not closed off. I can't present these to the Clerk of Works. To enable him to start his inspections, snag sheets need to be completed and signed off before I receive them. And then snag sheets need to be amended with references to photos which aren't there omitted. And then snag sheets need to be given to Bez and Taff on site or electronically. They're the ones doing the work, not me. Do you see that there? So at this point, is it fair to say that you were not happy with the snagging process that Harley had adopted?
Yes, it is fair to say I wasn't happy.
And were the problems you identified in this email ever rectified? Did it get better?
Yes, I would say it got better.
How quickly did it get better?
Well, some of those snags are only a sort of half hour, minor work. I would consider those, they are snags. They are minor bits of work which need to be finished off before you can consider that elevation or that part of the cladding fully finished. So I remember, I believe this was the first one we did, and it was about, it was partly me setting the standard that I expected from Harley's.
Yeah. Now, if we could just look back at paragraph 86.2 of your statement, this at page 20. And if we go on the third sentence, you say, I did one of the pre-handover snags of the finished exterior on the north elevation as Ben Bailey could not make it to site. Do you see that there?
Yes. Yes. I'm trying to think.
Do you think that was the north elevation?
I think that actually now, reading this again, that might be the south elevation.
Right.
I don't remember, I don't know if you have a copy. It was, I took a copy of the drawing, so the elevation, and marked on there, I think there was about 15 to 20 points, bits I wasn't happy. I don't know if you have a copy of that.
Not instantly, but
no, which would show on there. I'd hope to show that that was the elevation. It might say on there what elevation it was.
Right.
But I remember it being the last elevation, which was the south elevation. So I do believe I might have that wrong in my statement.
Okay.
Do you remember whether it was the elevation that had the entrance to the tower?
Yes, it was that one.
Yeah, which would be the south. Yeah. Yeah. Now, just moving on to look at the remaining parts of your inspection process. So step 3 below that, you said is, I went and viewed all of the finished elevations before offering those to John Hoban of RBKC Building Control and John White, the Clerk of Works. Did you have any form of method statement for those inspections?
No method statement.
And just to be clear, did you have any experience of inspecting cladding works before you undertook this task?
Only the cladding works that I've stated previously were in the jobs that I did. But to me at that stage, that's my site manager role, is to inspect and finish finished areas.
Did you have any training in this aspect of your role?
specific training, no, but 20 years of experience of what I expected a finished building to look like.
Yeah.
And that it should be in accordance with the plans and specifications.
And can you just help us to exactly how you carried out these final finished elevations inspections?
Like I think I explained to you earlier, is you could say that I almost, in fairness, was jumping on the back of the Harley's inspections. They were giving me finished product, and that's what their inspection sheets were showing. So I would go up the building, but I would do it with an installer who had a little bucket of tools to finish things off. So by that time, and we also knew about the cladding panels, any scratches, so I wouldn't expect to see any panels up there with scratches. So I don't think I have a formal inspection sheet saying I've done it, but what I've done is gone up the building and come back down with an installer and said, right, not quite happy with that little bit, and we just finish it off there and then and come back down. So by the time I got to the bottom, I was happy that those elevations were ready for the clerk of works and building control to inspect.
Yeah. Were you aware at the time that Rydon had a quality control checklist?
Yes.
Can we just have a look at that? It's RYD 42087. So this is I think it's a 2-page checklist. So we can see there the first page, and you've got to tick if certain works have been completed to a satisfactory standard. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then can we just look at page 2? So you've got a checklist there which is by room and the work to be done and D-snag check to be signed and dated and then who it's to be completed by. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Did you use this checklist for your inspections of the cladding works?
On this project, no, I didn't. I've used these before. I remember being on the first project that they were brought out in, and the idea behind them was to make sure that subcontractor was doing their works in accordance. But they also were designed that the subcontractor was to take responsibility for them in some way. So a Harley snag sheet would take precedent over this.
Right, I see. Did anyone at Rydon, for example, Mr. Blake, ever check your work? Like check what you were doing in terms of your inspections?
He asked me whether I was doing my job and going up there and snagging it and doing the bits I was supposed to, yes.
Did Mr. Blake or anyone else at Rydon ever inspect the works for themselves?
No, because I wouldn't expect that to be his role as such, to actually go out on an inspection. I would expect Steve, if he saw something wrong with something I was doing or anything anyone was doing, was to tell me, and I would go out there and fix it. And he certainly did that in terms of sort of things he saw possibly you could say were unsafe. He made me go and make sure people were doing things right. But in terms of a formal inspection, no.
Did anyone ever raise concerns about the thoroughness of inspections that have been carried out?
No. I believe we've been quite thorough.
Yeah.
Making sure that subcontractors are doing their work and they're giving me sheets telling me that I've done it all. So like I say, they have a responsibility to make sure their work is correct in the first place. I go up there, I check. I do not have any sheets proving that I checked, but by the simple fact that when I took building control and clerk of works up there, came back with very minor issues.
Yeah. If we go back to your step-by-step process, that you've got a paragraph 86.4 on page 20 of your statement. This is after, so you've said in 86.3 that you've viewed all of the finished elevations before offering them to building control and the clerk of works. And then you say, on the first proper handover inspection, John Hoban and John White came up together and John White did a snag list. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Can you recall when the first proper handover inspection was? We're currently somewhat unclear as to when that might have been.
That was the second time I took John Hoban up for mast climbers. So in my witness statement, the second time I took him up there was the formal inspection. I had told him, we are ready. It is all up there for you. Please come and have a look. And as I said earlier, the clerk went up there with building control and the clerk was the one who wrote the list because
So early January 2016, could that be?
Yes, I
Yeah.
believe it was.
And was the cladding complete by that stage?
Yes. Sorry, when I say complete, it was complete from the 4th floor up to the 23rd floor.
Yeah. So taking that 4th floor to the 23rd
Yeah.
floor, would building control have had any opportunity at that inspection to look behind the cladding panels to see the insulation and cavity barriers, or would that all have been covered up?
On that visit, no, they would not have been able to see it, but that was the point of the first visit a couple of weeks prior, to make sure that he could see it. As I explained to you, last thing I wanted on that handover inspection, the second one we did, was for John to say, I've not seen behind it, please take some panels off so I can see. That's why I took him up first time. As you could say, it was a pre-inspection
Right.
visit
Yeah.
to make sure that he was happy with the insulation and the cavity barriers, what he could see at the time.
What did you understand the role of building control to be during their inspections?
That if they see anything wrong, they would tell us.
Do you agree that it's not the role of building control to quality control the works carried out by Rydon and Harley?
I don't know the semantics of it, but I would always expect building control, if they didn't see the quality was right, to say something.
Right.
Whether you say they have responsibility, I don't understand that, but I would always expect them to, if they saw something substandard, in their opinion, to tell us.
Do you agree that in a design and build contract, the contractor can't rely solely on building control to raise issues that it might have missed?
Yes, I do agree.
And was that what you were doing in practice? I mean, how much reliance were you placing on building control to pick up things you might have missed?
Me, on what these inspections, none.
Yeah.
I was taking him up there, thinking it was completely finished, and hoping that he would say, yes, I agree with you. It is finished, and I'm happy. Carry on. Please strike the ice climbers.
So did you understand he was on that is it finished check? Was he looking at any questions of compliance with the building regulations at all, or was it... What did you understand him to be looking for on that visit?
I thought every visit they do, they are looking at compliance with building regulations. That's their role.
Yeah. Now, just moving on to your step 5. So you've got... You've said on the first proper 86.4, we've just discussed that the first proper handover inspection, John Hoban and John White came up together, and John White did a snag list. And then you say 86.5, then Harleys would rectify the snags, and John White would inspect again to check they were done. John Hoban did not want to view the completed snags as they were mainly scratches. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So did you rely on John White to check that the snags had been rectified?
Yes, because that's part of the handover process. Anything on a client inspection sheet, they need to check that has been done.
And why did Rydon not check for itself
We
as
did.
well? You did?
Yes.
When was that?
Prior to taking John White up there.
I see. So before 86.4, before the first proper handover inspection, you say you'd have checked?
Yes. That's how snagging process works. Is, as I said before, Harleys do their own snags. They present it to me. I then check it. I check I'm happy that I can present it to the people who need to approve our work or Rydon's work, which is building control and the clerk of works. So then any snags which come out of those two lists, I then give back to Harleys because it's them doing the work.
Yeah.
They rectify the snags. I then check the snags are done, and then I I give the finished product back to, I ask John Hoban, I'm getting confused with John's here, John White, to come back and inspect that the snags are done. And as I said before, I would never have struck those mast climbers unless I knew that I had that assurance that John White was happy that all the snags had been done.
Yeah. Were you aware of what the obligations were between the TMO and John Rowan and Partners, the Clerk of Works? Were you aware of what they had been contracted to do by the TMO?
Not at all.
So
Well,
you weren't...
sorry, I knew that they were Clerk of Works, and I'd expect that to be what a Clerk of Work does. I have a Clerk of Work on every job.
And would you expect that to include checking for compliance with the building regulations?
I would say it's more checking with compliance with the plans and specifications as per my role is.
Now, I just want to look at your witness statement at paragraph 97, so something to say further on. This is at RYD 3094213 at page 22. This is the meeting that you said you had there. You say, I had a meeting on the 12th of January 2016 with John White and Tony Batty, they're the Clerk of Works, which was also attended by Andrew Malcolm of Artelia and Matt Smith of Max Fordham. The purpose of this meeting was to go through the Clerk of Works reports to date and correlate all of the outstanding issues onto one definitive list. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And who was that list then provided to after that list had been compiled?
Well, Andrew Malcolm took or sort of chaired the meeting. He was the one who provided the minutes afterwards with all the items, and then I would have gone through with the relevant subcontractors to get all the outstanding items finished. I know quite a few of them, certainly Tony Batty's items would have been JSW because it would have been M&E snags or bits which were outstanding.
So were you responsible for resolving the outstanding issues?
I was responsible for managing the process, i.e. telling the subcontractors this is still outstanding, the clerks are not happy with it, please sort it out or give me the information that they're asking for. Then I would have given it back to the clerks.
Yep.
So this meeting, the idea of this meeting was, it was all part of the handover process. The clerks were never going to sign off a building unless everything that had been done and all their reports, including the ones prior to my involvement. So this was a meeting to go through all of the reports prior to my involvement, get all the outstanding items on there, items they were still not happy have been resolved satisfactorily, and get them all onto one definitive list so then I could work my way through them and resolve them and rectify them.
Yeah.
Or get the responsible parties to do the work.
Now, I want to show you something that Mr. Neil Reed of Artelia has said about that meeting. If we can go to his witness statement, this is at ART 406663 at page 15. So Mr. Reed says, on the 12th of January 2016, Andrew Malcolm, my assistant EA, attended a Clerk of the Works reports review meeting at which JRP, John Rowan Partners, Silcock Dawson, Rydon and Max Fordham were present. During this meeting, the Clerk of Works reports were reviewed for outstanding points. Those points were then identified and responsibility was allocated to an individual present at the meeting to address them. A number of outstanding issues on fire stopping and fire sealing were identified and were the responsibility in each case of Dave Hughes of Rydon. John White also raised a number of issues at the meeting relating to fireproofing. Apart from the instruction of a quotation for fireproof painting, those issues were the responsibility of Dave Hughes. Once again, as would be expected for a project of this nature, outstanding issues were identified and arrangements were made for them to be addressed before completion. And then he says, in any event, as he explains further below, both Silcock Dawson and John Rowan and Partners later formally signed off on Rydon's work for the purposes of certifying practical completion. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So if we can go back one page, I want to ask you about some of these outstanding issues. It said there a number of outstanding issues were identified on fire stopping and fire sealing. Do you recall what those issues were?
One of the issues was to do with the fire sealing of the communal pipes through the floors in the heating cupboards on each lobby.
Yeah.
So from the 4th floor up to the 24th floor, there was a new heating cupboard where all the new communal pipework came up, and to do that, they drilled holes through the floor. The clerks weren't happy what had been done, or it wasn't 100% in accordance with the specification, what had been specified. So they were raising a concern with it. So I don't agree with it. It's my responsibility, but I went through the process of managing and getting the subcontractors or whoever needed to do the works to get them signed off. And like he said, the clerks, we did what was required and to the satisfaction of the clerk of works.
Yeah, that was my next question. Did you agree that these were your responsibility in each case?
I would say he's saying they're Rydon's responsibilities as a main contractor, and I was one sitting in the meeting, so they're saying, yes, you're the one who needs to thing. Whether I'm responsible for it, I'm not the one doing the work, I'm managing the work.
Yeah.
So I'm responsible for, making sure the job is done or get the relevant subcontractors to do what was needed.
Yeah. There's also reference there to fireproofing, a little bit below that, 2 lines below that. John White also raised a number of issues at the meeting relating to fireproofing. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you know what that's referring to as distinct from the others above?
I think fireproofing is to do with the intermittent paint to the steelwork. To me, that's fireproofing, is to almost painting steel in a sort of intermittent fireproof or fire paint.
Yeah.
Fire sealing was to do with penetrations through holes, or penetrations through floors, or walls.
Yeah. The meeting minutes of that, we can just have a look at. They're ART 406688. If we look, so we can see at the top, it says Clerk of Works, COW reports review meeting minutes dated the 12th of January 2016. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And we can see you're in attendance together with the Clerk of Works and some others. And if we look at page 5 of the minutes, at the bottom of the page, 4th line from the bottom, it says there, fireproofing all around the site, new and existing, needs to be done as per the fire strategy. And then your initials are next to this.
Yes.
Now, what fire strategy is being referred to there?
As far as I was concerned, it was the fire strategy drawings.
Right, yeah. And the fireproofing is as per your description just now, is it?
Yes. To me, that's what fireproofing is more a coating of materials.
I see, yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'm about to start a related topic, which is a little bit more on the Clerk of Works. I think if I start the next bit,
I think it might be better to have a break now.
Exactly.
Yes. How are you getting on? Right.
We're getting on fine.
Steadily? Good.
Yes.
Mr. Hughes, we'll have another break now so we can all get some lunch. Please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with the refurbishment while they're out of the room.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll resume at 2 o'clock, please. All right?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go with the usher. (2 o'clock), please. Thank you.